Clara Whitfield pressed her dead husband's pocket watch against the pawnbroker's counter with both hands and didn't let go. Her little boy was burning with fever 3 blocks away. The medicine cost $2. The watch was all she had left of the man she'd loved and buried. She closed her eyes. She let go. If you've ever had to give up something sacred just to keep someone alive, this story is for you. Subscribe to this channel. Follow Clara's journey all the way to the end and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The pawnbroker's name was Gerald Finch, and he had the eyes of a man who'd seen 1,000 desperate people walk through his door and felt nothing for any of them. He picked up the pocket watch with 2 fingers, turned it over twice, held it up toward the light from the single window behind him, and set it back down on the counter without a word. Clara Whitfield stood on the other side of that counter and did not move. She was 24 years old, wide-shouldered and full-figured, with dark chestnut hair pinned back from a face that people in the town of Millhaven, Texas, might have called pretty if they'd ever bothered to look past the rest of her. They rarely did. She wore a dress that had been let out twice at the seams clean, but faded and her hands red from work. Rough at the knuckles were pressed flat on the counter because she needed something solid to hold on to. $1.50, Finch said. The watch is worth $4, Clara said. You know it is. Worth $4 to someone who wants it. Finch shrugged one shoulder. Nobody in Millhaven wants a dead man's watch. $1.50, take it or leave it. Clara's jaw tightened. She looked at the watch. Her husband Daniel had carried it every single day of their 5 years together. He'd shown it to her on their second meeting, proud as anything told her his father had brought it over from Virginia before the war. It still kept perfect time. She'd wound it every morning since the day they buried him out of habit, out of something she couldn't name. The medicine is $2, she said quietly. Finch spread his hands. That ain't my problem, ma'am. She stood there for a moment longer. Just a moment. Then she reached into the pocket of her dress and set a thin gold ring on the counter beside the watch. Her wedding ring. Finch picked it up, squinted at it. Another $1, maybe. That makes $2.50. $2.50 total, for both. Clara breathed in slowly through her nose. She nodded once. Fine, she said. Finch counted out the coins. Clara gathered them into her palm and closed her fist around them. She did not look at the watch again. She did not look at the ring. She turned and walked out of the shop, and the little bell above the door rang behind her bright and indifferent. Outside the morning was already hot. Millhaven in July sat under a sky the color of bleached bone, and the dust rose up from the street in little spirals that went nowhere. Clara walked quickly, her head down, her fist tight around the coins. Past the feed store. Past the post office. Past 2 women in bonnets who stopped talking when they saw her and started again the moment she passed. She heard one of them. Mrs. Hadley, she thought, or maybe the younger Drummond woman, say something that included the words, poor thing, and something else that included the word size. And Clara kept walking, because she had spent her whole life walking past things people said about her, and she was very good at it by now. She turned down the side street toward the room she rented from old Mrs. Pratt, climbed the outside stairs, and pushed through the door. The room was small. A bed, a table, a window with no curtain. Her son Eli lay in the bed, 6 years old, his face the color of old candle wax, his breathing fast and shallow, in the way that had terrified her for the past 3 days. Mrs. Pratt's daughter, a girl of 14 named Rosie, who sometimes watched Eli in exchange for Clara, helping with the laundry, was sitting in the chair beside the bed, her hands folded in her lap, her face grave with the particular seriousness of young people confronted with something they don't know how to fix. He's been coughing, Rosie said, but he's sleeping now. Thank you. Clara set the coins on the table, pressed her hand briefly against Eli's forehead, still burning, and straightened. Go on home. Tell your mama I'll finish the sheets tomorrow. She said you don't have to. I want to. Go on. Rosie went. Clara picked up the coins and went back down the stairs. Dr. Harlan Morse had his practice on the far end of Main Street, in a building that also served as a dentist's office on Fridays. He was a decent man, not unkind, but his waiting room was full, and the woman behind the desk, A sharp-faced woman named Mrs. Pine, who had opinions about everything, looked up when Clara walked in and let her expression make its own commentary. "He's still with patients," Mrs. Pine said. "I'm not here to see the doctor. I just need the medicine he said to get for my boy. He told me $2. $2.15 with the dispensing fee." Clara's stomach dropped. "He said $2. That was before we had to send to San Antonio for the preparation. $2.15. Clara set $2 on the counter. Mrs. Pine looked at it. "I'm 15 cents short," Clara said. "I can bring it tomorrow morning, first thing." Mrs. Pine folded her hands. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitfield. We can't extend credit at this time. Policy. My son has a fever that's been climbing for 3 days. I understand that, truly. But policy. He's 6 years old." A silence. "I'm sorry," Mrs. Pine said, and she sounded almost like she meant it. Clara picked up her $2. She turned around. She went back out into the heat. She stood on the boardwalk outside Dr. Morse's office and counted the coins again as if they might have multiplied while she wasn't looking. They hadn't. She was 15 cents short, and she had nothing left to sell, and she knew exactly one person in Millhaven who might lend her 15 cents without making her feel like a beggar. And that was old Dutch Harmon, who ran the livery, and Dutch had gone to his daughter's wedding in Abilene and wouldn't be back until Thursday. It was Monday. She stood there in the July heat, and she thought about Eli's breathing, and she thought about Daniel's pocket watch, and she thought about the 15 cents, and she was so deep in that thinking that she almost didn't hear the argument happening 20 feet away outside the door of the general store. A man's voice, low and controlled but tight with something underneath it. "I said I need someone who can manage a household and keep ranch records, that's all. I don't need opinions about who's suitable." That was Owen Briggs, who owned the general store, speaking in the uncomfortable voice of a man being pressed into something he didn't want to be pressed into. "Now, Mr. Carter, I understand, but most of the women in town who have that kind of, 'I don't have time, Briggs, 30 days, that's what the bank gave me, 30 days. Clara turned her head. The man standing in the doorway of the general store was taller than she'd realized from a distance, with dark hair, going a little gray at the temples, and the kind of jaw that looked like it had been set against the world for a long time and had gotten used to the position. He wore a rancher's coat, dusty, and a hat that had seen several hard seasons. His eyes, when they swept across the street in a moment of frustrated restlessness, were a blue so pale they were almost gray. She'd seen him before. Nathan Carter. He owned a spread about 8 miles south of town, Carter Ranch, or what was left of it, people said. His father had built it. Nathan had been trying to keep it alive. "Who do you have?" Nathan said to Briggs, impatient. Briggs was quiet for a moment. Then reluctantly, he nodded in the direction of the boardwalk. Nathan Carter's eyes found Clara Whitfield. She watched him take in what he saw, a young woman heavy-set, standing alone on the boardwalk with $2 in her hand, and sweat at her temples, and a look on her face that she hadn't had time to rearrange before he was already looking. "Her," he said. "Not unkind, but not kind either. Just surprised the way men were always surprised, as if they expected a certain kind of person, and she kept showing up instead. She knows numbers better than half the men in this county," Briggs said, in the tone of someone telling the truth, only because there was no comfortable alternative. "Kept books for the mill before it closed. Knows cooking food stores' livestock records. She's—" He paused, clearly looking for the right word. "Capable." Nathan Carter looked at her for another moment. Clara walked over. She didn't wait to be called. She walked over, stood in front of Nathan Carter, and looked him straight in the face. "I heard you need someone who can manage a household and keep records," she said. "I can do that. I can do more than that if the work needs more." He looked at her. Not at her face exactly, more like he was trying to decide something, and she was the problem he had to solve. "The work is hard," he said. "It's a working ranch, not a domestic posting. Long days, physical work. I'm aware of what ranch work is, Mr. Carter. You've done it before. My father had 40 head before the drought of '78 took everything. I was 16, and I worked that land alongside him until there was nothing left to work." She met his eyes. "I'm not fragile." Something shifted in his expression barely. Not softening. More like he was recalculating. It would be a month's trial, he said. Room and board provided. $4 at the end of the month if the work's satisfactory. $4. She thought about Eli's breathing. I need an advance, she said. 15 cents. Nathan blinked. 15 cents, she repeated. Against the $4 at month's end. I need medicine for my son today. He studied her. You have a child, he said. He's 6. He can stay with Mrs. Pratt while I work at the ranch. She's willing. I just need the 15 cents today. Another silence. Behind Nathan Briggs was pretending to organize something on a shelf inside the doorway. Nathan reached into his vest pocket and set a quarter on the boardwalk rail between them. Keep the change, he said. Be at the South Trailhead by 6 tomorrow morning. I won't wait. He walked back into the store. Clara picked up the quarter and held it for a moment. Then she went to get her son's medicine. That evening she sat beside Eli while he slept the medicine, finally in him, his breathing already a little slower, a little easier, and she watched his face in the last light coming through the curtainless window, and she thought about what she was doing. She was going to work for Nathan Carter. She had heard things about Carter Ranch, the way you heard things in a small town, not in straight sentences, but in pieces sideways, dropped into conversations about other things. That it had been something once. That his father, Everett Carter, had been a real cattleman, respected the kind of man other ranchers deferred to. That Nathan had come back from somewhere she'd heard Kansas, she'd heard Colorado to take over after Everett died, and found the ranch in worse shape than he'd known. That he'd been fighting the bank for most of the last 2 years. That he was stubborn and private, and according to some people difficult. According to other people, he was just a man who'd been handed a problem too big for one person and hadn't figured out yet that he couldn't solve it alone. Clara thought she understood that particular problem. She smoothed the blanket over Eli's shoulder and made herself stop second-guessing and start planning instead. What she'd bring. What she'd need to know first when she arrived. What condition the records were likely to be in after a ranch running short-handed for 2 years. She had a feeling they were going to be a disaster. She was already thinking about how to fix them. She was at the South Trailhead at 5:45. Nathan Carter arrived at 6 on the dot on horseback with a second horse trailing behind him, a brown mare, steady-looking, already saddled. He looked at her standing there with her bag and her expression, and he said nothing for a moment. "You're early," he said. "You said 6. I wasn't sure of the road." He dismounted, took her bag, and tied it to the mare's saddle without being asked. He gave her a leg up without making anything of it. She settled herself, and they rode south without much conversation, which suited Clara fine. Carter Ranch came into view after 40 minutes of riding. She took it in without letting her face say anything. The main house was solid good bones, she noted immediately. The kind of structure built to last, but everything around it was in stages of failing. The fence line along the north pasture had 3 sections down. The barn doors hung at an angle, one hinge gone. The kitchen garden had gone to weeds. There were feed bags stacked against the side of the barn in a way that was going to invite rodents, and probably already had. The water trough near the barn needed new planking. The chicken coop door didn't close properly. She cataloged all of it without a word. Inside the house was clean enough, but stripped of anything that hadn't served a practical function. No curtains, no cloth on the table. The kitchen had good equipment, good iron, but the shelves were disorganized in a way that suggested whoever had last organized them had done so in a hurry or hadn't known what they were doing. The pantry had Gap supplies bought when the price was high, staples missing that should have been staples. Nathan poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of her. "Well," he said. "Your fence line needs work before you lose cattle through the North Gap," she said. "Your feed storage is going to have a rat problem within the week if it isn't moved. Your pantry's got about 11 days of supplies if you're feeding more than 2 people, which I assume you are, and your record books." She nodded toward the shelf where 3 ledgers sat. "I haven't looked at yet, but I'd like to." He looked at her. "You're not going to tell me the curtains are missing," he said, and there was an edge in it, testing, waiting for her to say something domestic. "The curtains can wait," Clara said. The fence can't. A beat. The books are a mess, he said. I figured. My father kept them his own way, and I haven't had time to... I'll sort them out. He looked at her again, that calculating look she was starting to recognize. You always talk this much, he said, when there's something worth saying. She picked up her coffee. Do you want me to list what else needs doing, or would you rather show me the operation first? Another beat. Finish your coffee, Nathan said, and the edge in his voice had changed just slightly. Not softer, but something. Then I'll show you the cattle. The cattle were in worse shape than she'd expected. Not starving Nathan Carter had enough pride for that, but thin and the grazing fields in the south pasture were showing the stress of a dry season. 38 head she counted, down from what she'd guess had been 60 or more based on the size of the operation. She asked about water sources. He told her about the creek low but not dry and the tank near the west fence. She asked about the grazing rotation. He told her they'd been using the south field exclusively. She didn't say what she thought about that, but she filed it away. The man who'd been working the ranch was named Pete Ellery, early 50s, quiet, capable with his hands if not with numbers. He looked at Clara when Nathan introduced her with the particular look of a man trying to figure out what he was supposed to think. She gave him a direct look back, and he settled on something close to neutral, which was fine with her. You keep a head count, she asked Pete. In my head mostly, he said. I'll need to write it down. Can you work with that? He shrugged. Suppose so. Good. By the end of the first day, she had a list. She'd spent 4 hours going through the ledger books, which were, as Nathan had warned, a mess not dishonest, just kept by a man who understood cattle deeply, and bookkeeping barely with entries, crossed out and rewritten, and totals that didn't match and supply costs logged without dates. She could work with it. It would take time, but she could work with it. She'd also reorganized the pantry, moved the feed bags, identified the gaps in supply that needed to be addressed at the next trip to town, written out a rotation schedule for the grazing fields based on what she'd seen, and started a list of materials needed for the fence repair. Nathan came in at dusk and looked at the table where she'd spread out her notes. He was quiet for a moment. You've been busy, he said. That's what you hired me for. He sat down, picked up the rotation schedule she'd written. His eyes moved across it. Where'd you learn grazing rotation? My father, and I read. The Agricultural Extension out of Austin puts out a bulletin. Mrs. Pratt gets copies. He set it down, picked up the supply list. Some of this. The beeswax and the linseed oil are for the barn doors and the hinge. The extra chain is for the well crank, which is starting to slip. The rest is pantry. He set the list down, looked at her across the table. You figured all that out today, he said. I figured most of it out on the ride in, she said. I just wrote it down today. Another silence. Supper's ready, she said. Beans and salt pork. I'll do better once I know what's in the smokehouse. They ate mostly in silence, which was fine. Clara was not afraid of silence. She'd grown up in a house full of it after her mother died, and her father stopped talking about much except the weather and the cattle. She'd learned to be comfortable and quiet, to fill it with her own thinking, which was usually more useful than conversation anyway. But Nathan Carter's silence had a different quality to it. It wasn't empty. It was like a wall that had been built carefully, one stone at a time, and she could feel it there without quite being able to see it. After supper, she washed the dishes. He sat at the table with the ledger books she'd laid out and looked through them in a way that suggested he hadn't looked at them properly in a long time. How bad is it? He said without looking up. She was quiet for a moment. Manageable, she said, if you move quickly. That bad. The water situation is the biggest concern. The south field is going to give out within 3, maybe 4 weeks if the creek keeps dropping. You need to open the east pasture and let the south rest. And you need to fix the fencing before you can do that. I know the fencing needs fixing. Then fix it. He looked up at her. She met his eyes. I'm not here to tell you things you want to hear, Mr. Carter, she said. You can get that from anybody. I'm here to tell you what's actually happening on this ranch. A long pause. "Fair enough," he said. She dried her hands and gathered her shawl. "I'll start on the records first thing tomorrow," she said. "Good night." She went to the small room off the kitchen, barely more than a storage room with a cot, but private and clean enough. And she sat on the edge of the cot in the dark and thought about Eli, who would be sleeping at Mrs. Pratt's tonight in a borrowed bed, and about Daniel's pocket watch sitting in Gerald Finch's display case, and about 38 head of cattle that needed more grass than they had, and about the way Nathan Carter had said, "How bad is it with the particular flatness of a man who already knew the answer and was just waiting to hear it confirmed?" She thought this ranch is salvageable. She thought he doesn't know that yet. She thought he's going to. She lay down on the cot and closed her eyes and was asleep before she'd quite finished thinking. The days that followed had a rhythm to them. Clara was up before Nathan, which she could tell surprised him, though he didn't say so. She had coffee going and whatever could be assembled for breakfast from what was in the pantry by the time he came in from the early check of the cattle. She ate quickly and was already at the table with the ledger books by the time he finished. She rebuilt the accounts from the beginning of the year. It took 3 days of working through crossed-out entries and mismatched sums, but by the end of it, she had a clear picture. The ranch owed the bank $240 due at the end of 30 days. From the date Nathan had spoken to the loan officer, which meant 27 days from now, since she'd arrived 3 days in. Against that, the cattle, if they could be brought to weight, would sell for somewhere between $300 and $350 at the late summer market. If they made it to market. If the grazing held. If the water held. A lot of ifs. She presented this to Nathan on the 4th evening. He sat across from her and looked at the numbers she'd laid out and didn't say anything for a while. "You think we can make market," he said. "I think you can," she said. "If the east pasture gets opened in the next 5 days. If the fence holds. If the water creek doesn't drop below." A lot of ifs. Yes. He looked at the numbers. Looked at her. "You ever tell anybody anything they actually want to hear?" he said. "Occasionally," she said. "When it's true." The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was something. The fence repair took 4 days. Pete did most of the physical work, but Clara helped. She'd told Nathan she wasn't fragile, and she'd meant it, and she knew how to stretch wire and set posts, even if her hands weren't used to it anymore. Nathan worked alongside them, mostly silent, working with the focused economy of a man who'd been doing physical labor all his life. The first day she caught him watching her twice, not the way men sometimes watched her, with something calculating or unkind in it. Just watching the way you watched something that was slightly different from what you'd expected. The second day, Pete told her she had a good eye for the post spacing. She thanked him and kept working. By the 4th day, the fence was solid, and the cattle were moved to the east pasture, and the south field began to rest. On the 6th day, 3 men rode onto the property. Clara was in the kitchen garden. She'd started clearing the weeds more to have something to do with her hands than because anyone had asked when she heard the horses. She straightened and turned. The men were from town. She recognized 2 of them, Wade Connors, who had a competing spread to the southeast, and his foreman, a thick-necked man named Boyle. The third man she didn't know. Nathan came out from the barn and stood in the yard. "Connors," he said. "Flat. Carter." Connors looked around the property with the look of a man taking inventory. "Heard you brought in some help." "I did." Connors' eyes found Clara. He took his time. "That her," he said. Nathan's jaw tightened. "That's my household manager, yes." "Huh." Connors turned something over in his expression that wasn't kind. "Briggs told me she was capable." The pause before capable said a great deal. Clara looked at Connors calmly and went back to pulling weeds. "What do you want?" Nathan said. "Just a neighborly visit." Connors smiled, which made him look worse, not better. "I hear the bank's got a 30-day clock on you. Thought I'd let you know when you're ready to talk about the South Quarter. I'm prepared to offer a fair price." "The ranch isn't for sale." "Not yet." Connors glanced at Clara again. "You sure you want to put your future in the hands of—" He gestured vaguely. "I'm sure," Nathan said, that you should ride back the way you came before this conversation goes somewhere you don't want it to go. Connors smiled again. Just trying to help a neighbor. Help yourself, Nathan said. Good day. Connors looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned his horse and rode out his men behind him. Boyle looked back once at Clara with a look she'd seen before and didn't think about more than she had to. Nathan was quiet for a moment after they'd gone. You should know, he said, coming to stand near the garden, that Connors has been trying to buy this property for 3 years. I gathered, Clara said, pulling another weed. He'll be back. I expect so. She sat back on her heels and looked up at him. Do you have a title to the South Quarter separate from the main deed, or is it all one? He blinked. All one, he said. Good. Harder to pick apart in court that way. She stood, brushed the dirt from her skirt. I'd like to write to the land office in Austin this week, just to confirm the filing is current. Would that be all right? He looked at her. Yes, he said. That's... He stopped. Yes. She nodded and went back to the weeds. He stood there for another moment before he went back to the barn. On the 8th day, a woman from town named Vera Hadley came to the ranch. She arrived in a buggy, which meant she'd planned the visit, and she wore her good visiting dress, which meant she had an agenda. She was the wife of a merchant, comfortably situated, the kind of woman who organized things. Charity drives, church committees. The social arithmetic of a small town, and who had a gift for making observations sound like kindness. She came to the kitchen door where Clara was working and looked at her with an expression of careful, considered pity. I heard you'd taken a position out here, Vera said. I thought I'd come see how you were settling in. Very well, thank you, Clara said. Can I offer you coffee? Oh, I won't stay. But she came inside anyway, which Clara had expected. She looked around the kitchen, more organized now, with the shelves cleared and labeled, the iron hung neatly. A pot of stew on the stove, and something moved across her face that might have been surprise. You've been busy. The work keeps me that way. Vera set her bag on the table and folded her hands over it. Clara, I want to speak frankly. All right. People are talking about you being out here, alone, with Mr. Carter. Pete Ellery is also here, Clara said. He sleeps in the bunkhouse. That's not quite. And I have a child in town who needs my wages, Clara said, still pleasant, still calm. I'm working a job, Mrs. Hadley, that's all. Vera looked at her in a particular way, not unkind exactly, but with the weight of something unsaid underneath the kindness. Of course. I want you to be realistic, Clara. About expectations. Mr. Carter is a widower. He's in difficult circumstances, and sometimes women in your position. In my position, Clara repeated. Vera had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. I just mean you're a capable woman. Everyone knows that. I simply wouldn't want you to confuse employment for something else, Clara said. Don't worry, Mrs. Hadley. I'm very clear on what this is. She walked to the kitchen door and held it open. Vera gathered herself. I only meant... You meant well, Clara said. I know. Good day, Mrs. Hadley. After the buggy had gone, Clara stood at the window for a long moment. She had kept her face very calm during that conversation. She'd had years of practice keeping her face calm when people said things directly or sideways about what she was worth, what she should expect, what a woman who looked the way she looked could reasonably hope for. She knew what Vera Hadley had been trying to say without quite saying it. Don't get ideas. Don't mistake kindness for interest. Don't forget what you are. She'd heard versions of it her whole life. She went back to the stove and stirred the stew. She was not here for romance. She was here for $4 and a chance to pull a sick child through the summer, and maybe if the work went the way she thought it could go, a reputation for the kind of work that got passed along from one rancher to another and led to more work. That was what she was here for. She stirred the stew. She told herself that firmly. That evening, Nathan came in from a long day at the fence line and the cattle and sat at the table without taking his hat off, which meant he was tired in the way that went bone deep. She set a plate in front of him, and he looked at it and then at her. Sit down, he said. She looked at him. "I ate standing up at noon," he said. "Sit down and eat properly." She brought her own plate and sat. They ate in silence for a while. Not the heavy silence of two strangers. Something else, a silence that had started to get familiar around the edges worn smooth. "Vera Hadley came today," Clara said. "I saw the buggy. She's worried about talk." Nathan looked at her. "Are you—" "No," Clara said. "Are you—" He was quiet for a moment. "People talk about whatever they want. Always have." "Yes." Another silence. "She's not a bad woman," he said. "Vera, she just thinks she's helping." "Most people do," Clara said. He looked at her sharply. Something sharp in it, not unfriendly. "You saying that about me," he said. "I wasn't." A pause. "But if it fits." He looked at her for a long moment. Then something that was almost a laugh moved through his expression and was gone before it quite arrived. "Finish your supper," he said. She did. On the 10th day, a letter arrived from the bank. It was addressed to Nathan Carter, and he read it at the table with his coffee going cold beside him. And when he set it down, his face had the look of a man who'd been told something he'd already known was coming, but hadn't quite believed until now. Clara waited. "They're not going to extend the note," he said. "The full $240 due in 20 days. She nodded. "The cattle won't be ready for market in 20 days, he said. "No, not at current weight." He looked at the letter, looked at the table, looked at nothing. "What do I do?" he said. It wasn't a question he was asking her exactly. It was the kind of question a man asked the room when he'd run out of other places to put it. But she answered it anyway. "There are a few options," she said. "You could talk to the bank again with the records I've put together. The operation is in better shape than it was 3 weeks ago, and I can show the numbers to prove it. That might buy time." She paused. "Or there's something I noticed in the deed records. The east quarter up by the old Dry Creek bed. It's not been in active use in over 4 years. The soil there is different. It might interest someone looking for land specifically, rather than a working ranch." Nathan looked at her. "That's my father's land." "I know," she said quietly. "He bought that quarter specifically. It was—" He stopped. "I know," she said again. Silence. "I'm not saying you have to sell it," Clara said. "I'm saying the option exists. What matters is what you decide matters more." He was quiet for a long time. Outside, Pete was moving around the barn, the sounds of evening chores carrying in through the open window. The cattle were in from the east pasture, settled for the night. The stew was done. The records were straight. "You think the bank meeting would work," Nathan said. "I think it has a better chance than you believe it does," Clara said. "The numbers tell a different story than they did 3 weeks ago." He picked up the letter, set it down, picked up his coffee, found it cold, and drank it anyway. "All right," he said. "All right what?" "All right, we try the bank first." He looked at her across the table. "Will you come with me to show the records?" She hadn't expected that. "Yes," she said. "I will." He nodded once. "First thing Monday," he said. She nodded back. She gathered the plates and went to the wash basin and stood with her back to him, washing the dishes, and she was very careful not to let anything show on her face that had any business being there. She was here to work. The records were good. That was enough. That was what she told herself. Monday came with the kind of heat that made the air feel solid. Clara had been up since 4:30. Not because she couldn't sleep, she'd slept well better than she had in months, which surprised her, but because there was something about the bank meeting that sat in her chest like a stone. She needed to move before the day started. She had gone over the numbers 3 times the night before. She had organized the ledger pages in order, written a summary sheet in her clearest hand, noted every improvement made in the 10 days since she'd arrived at Carter Ranch. She had done everything she could do with paper and ink. The rest was Nathan's problem. He came into the kitchen at 5:15, already dressed, his hat in his hand, and he stopped when he saw her at the table. "You're up," he said. "I've been up," she said. Coffee's hot. He poured a cup and stood at the counter, not sitting. The way men stood when they had somewhere to be and couldn't quite settle. She watched him from the corner of her eye. He was nervous. Not the kind of nervous that showed on the surface. He was too controlled for that, but the kind that lived in the jaw, in the stillness of a man trying to hold too many things in place at once. "You want to go over the numbers before we go?" she asked. "I know the numbers," he said. "I know you know the numbers. I'm asking if you want to go over them." A pause. "Yes," he said. She walked him through the summary sheet. The debt, the cattle projections, the improved grazing rotation, the water situation, the cost savings from the reorganized supply purchasing. She explained each line clearly and without editorializing the way she'd learned to present information to men who had pride wrapped up in not needing explanations. You gave them the facts in the same tone you'd use to discuss the weather, and you let them feel like they'd understood it on their own. By the time they were done, the sky outside had gone from black to the flat gray that came before sunrise. "It's a strong case," she said. "If they listen," Nathan said. "Make them listen." He looked at her. Something crossed his face that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the same territory. "You make it sound simple," he said. "I know it isn't. But the numbers are good, and the argument is sound." She held his gaze. "You built something worth fighting for. Say that like you believe it." Howe was quiet for a moment. "And if they don't move," he said. "Then we go to the next option," she said. "But let's try this one first." The Millhaven branch of the Southern Cattle Bank was run by a man named Arthur Greer, who had the manner of someone who had made many difficult decisions in his life and had learned to keep his face perfectly still while making them. He was not a cruel man. He was, Clara thought, when she walked in behind Nathan and took the chair against the wall that men in her position were expected to take a man who believed in the order of things. Nathan sat across from Greer and set the ledger on the desk. Greer looked at it, then looked at Nathan. "I appreciate you coming in, Mr. Carter," he said. "But the bank's position hasn't changed. The note is due in 20 days. "I know that," Nathan said. "I'm asking you to look at what's changed on the ranch before you hold to that." Greer's eyes moved to Clara briefly, with the particular blankness of a man who has decided not to comment on something. "These records were prepared by Miss—" Nathan paused just slightly. "By my household manager." "Mrs. Whitfield," Clara said from the wall, even though no one had asked. Greer nodded slowly, picked up the ledger, opened it to the summary page she'd written. The room was very quiet. Clara watched Greer's eyes move across the page. She watched the small, almost invisible shift in his expression when he reached the cattle projections. She watched him turn to the next page, and the next. "These are your current head counts," he said. "Verified 3 days ago," Nathan said. 38 head, all accounted for, all in better condition than they were 4 weeks ago. The grazing situation has been stabilized. The operating costs have been brought down." He paused. "I'm asking for a 60-day extension. Not a reduction in what's owed. Not a restructuring. 60 days, and I'll meet the full note at market." Greer set the ledger down, folded his hands over it. "Mr. Carter," he said in the tone of a man choosing his words carefully. "The bank has been patient with Carter Ranch. Your father was a man we had a great deal of respect for. I know. But patience has its limits, and these numbers—" He tapped the summary page. "These numbers tell me things have improved. They don't tell me things have improved enough." "Tell me what enough looks like," Nathan said, "and I'll tell you how to get there." Greer looked at him. Clara said from the wall, "Mr. Greer." Both men looked at her. She stood up. She walked to the desk, not quickly, not aggressively. She'd learned long ago that the way you moved in a room told people whether they needed to take you seriously. And she set her finger on the summary page on the projection line for late summer market. "If the cattle reach market at the projected weight," she said, "the sale price will be between $310 and $340. The note is $240. That's a minimum surplus of $70, which gives Mr. Carter operating capital going into fall." She looked at Greer steadily. "The risk to the bank if you extend 60 days is minimal. The risk to Mr. Carter if you don't is total." Greer looked at her finger on the page, looked at her. You're very confident in these projections, he said. I'm confident in this work behind them, she said. If you'd like to ride out to the ranch and inspect the operation yourself, we'll welcome you. A pause. That won't be necessary, Greer said. He picked up the ledger, set it down, picked up his pen. 60 days, he said. Not a day more. Nathan was very still. Thank you, he said. Thank your bookkeeper, Greer said, and he looked at Clara again with the expression of a man revising something. Good day, Mrs. Whitfield. Mr. Greer, she said. Outside in the street. Nathan stopped walking. Clara stopped beside him. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at nothing in particular, and she waited, because she'd learned already that he needed that a moment of quiet before he could say what he was actually thinking. That was your doing, he said. You made the case, she said. I made the opening. You closed it. She didn't argue. We closed it together. He turned and looked at her. I don't know why you're working for $4 a month, he said. That's not a compliment to the $4. I just don't understand it. Because it's what was on offer, she said simply. He kept looking at her. That calculating look, but different now. Less like he was sizing up a problem, and more like he was looking at something he hadn't quite seen clearly before, and was only now beginning to. Come on, he said. We should get back. She fell into step beside him. She didn't let herself think about the way he'd said, we. The next 2 weeks moved fast. Faster than Clara had expected, which she took as a good sign because in her experience, time only moved fast when there was enough work to fill it. There was more than enough work. She had the grazing rotation running now, and the cattle were visibly improving. She could see it in the way they moved, the way they stood in the field in the mornings, the steadier pace of their breathing in the heat. Pete had stopped looking at her sideways after the first week, and had moved to something close to respect, which he showed the way men like Pete showed things by asking her opinion before making decisions rather than after. Those two on the north end of the east pasture, he said one morning coming into the kitchen as she was writing out the week's supply list. They ain't gaining like the others. Which two? The spotted one and the black with the white ear. She didn't look up from the list. Are they drinking from the main trough or the secondary? Pete blinked. I don't know. Find out, she said. If they're using the secondary trough, check the water quality. There was standing water near that trough last week that might have gone bad. Pete went to find out. He came back an hour later. Secondary trough, he said. Water's gone green. Clean it out and fill it fresh. Move those two closer to the main trough for the next few days. Yes, ma'am. She went back to the supply list. Nathan had come in part-way through this exchange. She realized she felt rather than heard him. The particular shift in the room that happened when he entered it, which she had noticed and chosen not to think about too carefully. He poured his coffee and didn't say anything. Bad water in the secondary trough, she told him. I heard, he said. I'll add trough treatment to the supply list. All right. A pause. Good catch, he said. She wrote trough treatment on the list. Pete caught it, she said. He came to tell me. He came to tell you, Nathan said in a tone that meant something she didn't quite parse. Not me. She looked up. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Not unhappy. Something else. He knew you'd know what to do about it, Nathan said. You would have too, she said. Probably. He drank his coffee. But he came to you first. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to the list. The supply run is Thursday, she said. I'll have the full list ready by Wednesday evening. She went to see Eli on Thursday. Mrs. Pratt let her in with the particular warmth of a woman who had raised children and understood the shape of a mother's worry, even when it was being held very quietly. Eli was in the back garden, thin-legged and fierce-looking in the way of 6-year-old boys who have recently been very sick and are furious about it, constructing something elaborate with sticks and string. He looked up when Clara came through the gate, and his face did the thing it did. Opened up all the way, like a window being pushed up, and he ran to her, and she caught him, and held him, and pressed her face into his hair for a moment. You smell like horses, he said against her shoulder. "You smell like Mrs. Pratt's soap," she said. "Which is worse?" He leaned back and looked at her with her husband Daniel's eyes, that particular shade of gray-green, serious and bright at the same time, and said, "When are you coming home?" "A few more weeks," she said. "Are you being good?" "Mostly." "Eli." "Mostly good," he said firmly. "Some of the time I'm very good. Other times Mrs. Pratt says I'm testing her patience, but she smiles when she says it, so I think it's all right." Clara laughed. The kind of laugh that comes up from somewhere real before you decide whether to let it. She stayed for 2 hours. She helped Eli with his stick and string project, which turned out to be a fence for a collection of small stones that he was organizing into what he called a ranch. She did not let herself think about anything except his hands and his voice, and the particular seriousness with which he assigned each stone to its proper field. When it was time to go, he held on for a moment longer than usual. "Are you all right?" he said very quietly, the way children said serious things, without looking up, as if the words were easier when they were aimed at the ground. "I'm all right," she said. "I promise." She held him once more, and then let him go, and went to do the supply run. Wade Connors came back on a Friday afternoon. This time he didn't come with his men. He came alone on a good horse, dressed better than the last time, with a look on his face that said he'd thought carefully about his approach and decided to try a different one. Clara was in the kitchen garden. She'd been putting real time into it. The kitchen garden was going to matter, come fall, and she'd been thinking about what to plant in the remaining warm weeks, what could still be gotten into the ground in time. Connors dismounted at the fence and looked at her. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said. She looked up. "Mr. Connors." "Is Carter around?" "He's with the cattle. You want me to send someone?" "No." Connors smiled. It was a better smile than his last one, practiced like he'd worked on it. "Actually, I wanted a word with you, if that's all right." She sat back on her heels. "All right." He came to the garden fence and rested his arms on the top rail, easy and friendly. "You're doing good work out here," he said. "Word's gotten around. People are noticing." "Good. I mean it as a compliment." He paused. "Mrs. Whitfield, I'm going to speak plainly if you'll allow it." "Go ahead." "Carter Ranch has had a good month, because of you. But I've been watching this operation for 3 years, and I know its limits." He looked at her steadily. "Carter doesn't have the head for the business side. He's a good cattleman. But the finances, the record-keeping, the supply management, that's not him. And when you leave, it's all going to slide back." Clara pulled a weed, set it aside. "What's your point, Mr. Connors?" she said. "My point is that you're a talented woman working for—" He paused delicately. "Wages that don't match the work. I run a bigger operation. I need someone with your skills full-time. I'd pay you 3 times what Carter's paying." He said it like he expected it to land, and watched her face for the landing. She looked up at him. "I'm under contract for the month," she said. "Contracts end." "They do," she agreed. "And when this one does, I'll consider my options." Connors smiled. "That's all I'm asking." "Are you?" she said pleasantly. Something shifted in his expression. Barely. "What else would I be asking?" he said. "I don't know, Mr. Connors, but in my experience, when a man who's been trying to buy a ranch for 3 years suddenly takes an interest in the welfare of the woman keeping that ranch afloat, there's usually more than one reason." Connors was quiet. "You're a perceptive woman," he said. "Thank you," she said. "Good afternoon." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded, unhurried, and walked back to his horse. She watched him ride out. She stayed in the garden until she was sure the particular tightness across her shoulders had eased before she went back inside. She told Nathan about the visit that evening. Not all of it. The important part: Connors had come. Connors had offered her a position, and Connors was trying to use her as a lever against the ranch in some way she hadn't fully decoded yet. Nathan sat with this. "He offered you 3 times your wage," he said. "He did." "And you said—" "I said I was under contract." She paused. "I also told him I'd consider my options when the contract ended." His face went very still. I told him that, she said carefully, because it was the truth, and because showing him I wasn't going anywhere would have given him more information than I wanted him to have. Something moved in Nathan's face. Ah, he said. He's not trying to hire me, she said. He's trying to create uncertainty, make you wonder if I'll stay, make you worried. That's a negotiating tactic. He's trying to shake my confidence, Nathan said, in the ranch, and in me. She held his gaze. I wanted you to know before he had a chance to say anything directly to you. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Why? He said. The question was simple, and she knew what it meant. Not why are you telling me, but why are you protecting this? Because I'm here to do a job, she said. And doing it halfway doesn't interest me. He looked at her for another moment, something in his expression that she didn't examine. All right, he said. She went back to the ledger books. The twist that changed things didn't come from Connors, or the bank, or anything Clara had been watching for. It came from Pete Ellery. On a Tuesday evening, 17 days after Clara had arrived at Carter Ranch, Pete came into the kitchen, looking the way men looked when they had news they didn't want to deliver. Nathan was at the table. Clara was washing up. Pete stood in the doorway and held his hat. What? Nathan said. The west fence, Pete said. The section along the dry creek bed. What about it? I found it this afternoon. Pete paused. It's been cut. The kitchen went very quiet. Cut, Nathan said. 3 rails, clean cuts, not weather, not age. Pete's jaw was tight. And there's tracks in the mud along the creek. Horses. 3, maybe 4 came through sometime last night. Nathan was on his feet before Pete had finished speaking. Any cattle through, he said. 6 head far as I can tell. They're not in the east pasture, and they're not along the creek. Direction. Southeast. Southeast was Connor's territory. The silence in the kitchen was the kind that had a shape to it. Clara set down the dish she was holding. Nathan, she said. He turned. Don't ride out there tonight, she said. I know what you want to do, don't. His jaw was set in the way that meant he'd already made a decision. 6 head, he said. I know. I know what it is, she said. And if you ride onto Connor's land tonight with your blood up and no witnesses and no proof he wins without having to do another thing, he's counting on that. Nathan was looking at her like the words were getting through, but the anger was making it slow. Pete, she said, still looking at Nathan. Tomorrow morning, first light, I need you to go back to that fence and count the cut marks and measure the spacing. Write it down, every detail. Yes, ma'am. And I need you to track those cattle as far as you can in daylight and write down the direction and any landmarks. Yes, ma'am. Nathan, she said. Tomorrow we go to the sheriff, with Pete's written account and the physical evidence. We do this right. And tonight, Nathan said. Tonight, she said, you let Connors think he rattled you, because the moment he knows he didn't, you have the advantage. He stared at her. 6 head, he said again, quieter. I know. She held his gaze. I know. He sat back down. It cost him something. She could see it cost him something, but he sat back down. Pete went back to the bunkhouse. Nathan sat at the table with his coffee going cold and his hands flat on the wood, and Clara cleared up the kitchen around him and didn't say anything else because she'd said what needed saying, and anything more would only crowd him. After a while he said, You're not scared of me. She glanced at him. Should I be? Most people when I'm like this. You're angry, she said. That's a reasonable response to what just happened. What you do with the anger is what matters. He was quiet. Who taught you that? He said. My father, she said. He had a terrible temper when I was young. He learned to hold it. Took him a while, but he learned. She paused. He said the worst decisions he ever made were the ones he made in the first 10 minutes of being furious. Nathan absorbed this. He sounds like a sensible man, he said. He was, eventually. She hung up the dish towel. Try to sleep. Tomorrow's going to take clear heads. The sheriff's name was Walt Pruitt, and he was a fair man, operating inside the limits of a small-town economy that had Wade Connors as one of its larger financial contributors. He heard Pete's account. He looked at Clara's written summary of the timeline. He rode out with Nathan and Pete to inspect the cut fence. He came back with the expression of a man who knew what he thought and was also thinking about what he could prove. "The cuts are consistent with a blade," he said. "I'll grant you that. And the tracks are real, but tracks don't tell me who made them." "Southeast," Nathan said. "Straight toward Connors." "I know the direction," Pruitt said. "And I know what you're thinking. But I need more than direction and a cut fence to go on Connors' property, Nathan. You know that." Nathan's jaw tightened. "The cattle," Clara said. Both men looked at her. "The 6 head that went through," she said. "They have Carter Ranch markings. Brand and ear tag," Pete said. "Yes, ma'am." "If those cattle have been moved to Connors' land, they'll still carry those markings," she said to Pruitt. "Is there any legal basis for requiring an inventory of recently acquired stock at a neighboring operation?" Pruitt looked at her. "There are laws about receiving cattle that bear another ranch's mark," he said carefully. "I know there are," she said. "I looked them up at Mrs. Pratt's last Thursday. The 1878 Livestock Act gives you the authority to request an inventory of unmarked or recently acquired stock if there's documented evidence of fence tampering within 24 hours. She paused. "Pete documented the fence this morning. That's within the window." The silence stretched. Pruitt looked at Nathan. Nathan was looking at Clara. "Where'd you read that?" Pruitt said. "The Agricultural Law Bulletin out of Austin," she said. "Mrs. Pratt keeps copies." Pruitt was quiet for a long moment. Then he put his hat on. "I'll ride over to Connors," he said. "Request an inventory." Nathan stared at him. "Don't make me regret it," Pruitt said to Nathan, and then to Clara, something that wasn't quite a nod, but was in the same direction. He rode off. Nathan turned to look at her. "The 1878 Livestock Act," he said. "I've been thinking about Connors for 2 weeks," she said. "I like to be prepared." He stared at her. "Clara," he said. It was the first time he'd used her name. She felt it the way you felt a change in the air before a storm, a shift in pressure, something that hadn't been there a moment before. "We should wait here," she said, "in case Pruitt comes back." She walked to the fence line and stood with her back to him, looking out across the east pasture, and she made herself think about the cattle and the grazing rotation and the supply list. And not about the way her name had sounded in his voice, low and surprised, like it had come out before he'd meant to say it. Pruitt came back with the 6 cattle. He didn't say a word about what he'd seen on Connors' land or what Connors had said or how it had gone. He just brought the cattle through the gate and said, "You might want to reinforce that west fence line," and rode back toward town. Nathan watched his cattle come through the gate and counted them all 6 marked healthy unharmed and stood very still. Then he said quietly to nobody in particular, "I'll be damned." Pete grinned, quickly hit it. "I'll get them settled." He moved the cattle off. Nathan and Clara stood at the fence. "He's not done," Nathan said. "No," she agreed. "He's not done. But now he knows you're not alone out here, and you're not going to make it easy." She paused. "He'll recalculate." "And then what?" "And then he'll try something else," she said. "But we'll be ready for that too." Nathan looked at her sideways. "Will we?" he said. "I'm working on it," she said. I was quiet. The late afternoon light was doing something complicated across the pasture, the kind of light that made everything look briefly like it might turn out all right. "Clara," he said again. She looked at him. "Thank you," he said. Just that, straight. She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once. "The cattle need water after that walk," she said. "I'll get the trough filled." She went to do it. She was aware, without looking back, that he stood there for a moment longer before he followed. What happened next was the thing Clara had not prepared for. Not Connors, not the bank, not the fence, or the records, or the water supply. What happened was much simpler and much harder to manage. It was a Saturday late afternoon. The work was done for the day, or as done as ranch work ever was, and Pete had gone to town, and Nathan was repairing a hinge on the barn door, and Clara had finished the week's accounts and found herself for the first time in nearly 3 weeks with nothing immediate that needed doing. She sat on the back step with a cup of water and let the quiet settle around her. She thought about Eli, who she'd see Thursday. She thought about Daniel's pocket watch in Gerald Finch's display case. She thought about the numbers in the ledger solid now moving in the right direction, still fragile, but no longer desperate. She heard Nathan come around the side of the barn and then stop. She looked up. Hal was looking at her. He'd stopped short, like he hadn't expected to find her there, and the expression on his face, she caught it before he could arrange it, was the expression of a man looking at something that was causing him a problem he didn't quite know how to classify. He came and sat on the step beside her. Not close, but closer than necessary, given that there was the whole step and the whole yard. They sat in silence for a while. "How's your son?" he said. "Better. He's been up and out in the garden most days. Mrs. Pratt says he's building something." "What kind of something?" "A ranch, out of sticks and stones." She paused. "He takes after his father. Daniel could build anything out of whatever was nearby. It used to drive me crazy. I'd be missing a chair leg and find it had become part of some contraption." Nathan made a quiet sound that was close to a laugh. "He sounds like trouble." "He's wonderful," she said, and the word came out soft in a way that surprised her, and she didn't try to take it back. They were quiet again. "You miss him," Nathan said. "Every day." She looked at her hands. "He's the reason I'm here. Not the only reason, but the first one." "What's the second?" She thought about it. "Proving something," she said. "I know that sounds no," he said. "I understand that." Something in his voice, just a half note lower. Something that said he meant it in a more specific way than she'd expected. "What are you proving?" she asked. He was quiet. "That my father was right about this ranch," he said finally. "That it was worth building. That it was worth keeping." He paused. "He died believing it was going to fail. He didn't say so, but I knew. And I've been—" He stopped. "You've been trying to prove him wrong," she said, "after the fact." He looked at her. "Yes," he said, simply. She looked at the pasture. "I think he'd see what you've held on to," she said. "I think he'd know what it cost." The quiet that followed was different from the ones before. Warmer, heavier. The kind of quiet that had weight in it, that pressed against the edges of things. Nathan looked at her. She could feel it, the specific quality of being looked at, really looked at by someone who was not looking at her size or her dress or the state of her hands, but at her. She looked back. There was a moment, just a moment, that was longer than the time it took. Then she stood up. "I should start supper," she said. Her voice was level. Her face was calm. She'd had years of practice. She went inside. Behind her, she heard him stay on the step for a while longer. She stood at the stove and started on the biscuits and did not let herself think about anything except flour and butter and the correct amount of salt. It did not entirely work, but she kept at it. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. Clara knew it was bad before Nathan opened it. She knew it from the way the postal clerk had handed it to Pete in town, with that particular careful-handed solemnity that people reserved for news they were glad wasn't theirs to deliver. Pete had brought it back without saying what it was, just set it on the table in front of Nathan at breakfast, and stepped back, which was the closest Pete ever came to expressing concern. Nathan looked at the envelope, looked at the return address. Southern Cattle Bank, Austin office. Not the Millhaven branch. He opened it. Clara kept her hands on the ledger she was working through and didn't look up, but she heard the silence that came after the paper unfolded, the specific quality of a silence that meant the words on the page were worse than expected. "They're calling the note," he said. She did look up then. "Greer gave us 60 days, she said. "This isn't from Greer." Nathan set the letter on the table. "It's from the regional office, Austin," he paused. "They've reviewed the account. They say the collateral assessment on the ranch has changed. They're exercising the acceleration clause." Clara stood up and came to the table. She read the letter, She read it twice. The language was careful and legal and utterly merciless. The Southern Cattle Bank's regional office, acting on a review of accounts flagged for irregular collateral valuation, was invoking the acceleration clause in the Carter Ranch loan agreement. Full payment, $240, was now due in 14 days. Not 60. 14. "Who flagged the account?" she said. Nathan's jaw was set in the way she'd come to recognize as him holding something very tightly. "It doesn't say." "It doesn't have to say," she said. He looked at her. "Connors," she said. "He has a relationship with the regional office. Someone filed a complaint about the collateral valuation and pushed it up the chain." She turned the letter over as if there might be something on the back, and then set it down. "This is what he did when the cattle came back and Pruitt got involved. He went around all of it." 14 days, Nathan said. "I know. The cattle won't be at market weight in 14 days. "I know." He stood up and walked to the window and stood there with his back to her and his hands at his sides, and she gave him that a minute of just standing there because she'd learned by now when he needed to move through something before he could talk about it. "What are my options?" he said to the window. "3, she said. "You challenge the acceleration clause legally, which takes money you don't have and time you don't have. You find $240 from somewhere else in the next 14 days. Or—" She stopped. "Or I sell," he said. "There is one other option," she said, "that I've been thinking about." He turned. "The East Quarter," she said. "The Dry Creek bedland. I pulled the county survey records when I wrote to the land office in Austin. That parcel has a subsurface water table reading from 1879. The Geological Survey put it at 40 feet, which in this drought means it's probably sitting above a water source that the surrounding ranches don't have." She paused. "Water rights in Texas right now are worth more than cattle. There are buyers, not ranchers, but land speculators, railroad interests, who'd pay premium for that kind of parcel, quickly." Nathan was very still. "That land is—" he started. "Your father's," she said. "I know." "He bought it the year I was born," Nathan said. "He said he bought it for me. Said it was going to be—" He stopped, started again. "He said it was the future of the ranch." "It might still be," Clara said. "Just not the way he imagined." The silence was long and hard. "How much?" Nathan said finally. "If the water table reading is accurate, and we find the right buyer, possibly 300, maybe more." She held his gaze. "Enough to clear the note and have operating capital left." He turned back to the window. "Nathan," she said. He didn't turn. "I'm not asking you to decide right now," she said. "I'm asking you to let me write to 2 contacts in San Antonio, a land agent I found in the Austin Bulletin correspondence section, and see if there's a realistic offer to be had. No commitment, just information." A very long pause. "Write the letter," he said. She wrote it that afternoon. She wrote it carefully, the way she did everything carefully, specific enough to attract genuine interest, guarded enough not to show desperation. She described the parcel, the survey reading, the acreage, the location. She did not mention the 14 days. She said the seller was considering offers. Pete took it to town the next morning on the supply run. And then there was nothing to do but wait, which was its own kind of hard work. The ranch kept its rhythm, cattle, fences, records, meals, but the letter from the Austin office sat in Clara's mind like a splinter, small and specific and impossible to ignore. She ran the numbers every way she could think of. She looked at the ledger for angles she might have missed. She found nothing she hadn't already found. 14 days. 13 now. On the 12th day, something else broke. She heard it in the way Pete came through the door fast, which Pete never was, and the sound of Nathan coming from the barn at the same pace, boots hard on the ground. "What happened?" she said. She was already putting down the pot. "Bulls down," Pete said. "North end of the east pasture." She was moving before he finished the sentence. The bull, Nathan's best, the one animal on the ranch, whose condition directly correlated to the quality of the next generation of cattle, was on his side in the grass, breathing in the way that made her stomach drop. Not dead. but not right. His eyes were open, and he wasn't struggling, which was the part that scared her, because it meant he didn't have the energy to struggle. Nathan was already crouched beside him, his hand on the bull's neck, his face doing the thing it did when he was working very hard to stay controlled. "How long?" Clara said. "Pete found him an hour ago," Nathan said. "He was fine this morning." "Water," she said immediately. "What did he drink from today?" Pete and Nathan looked at each other. "The secondary trough," Pete said slowly. "We opened it back up last week after we cleaned it." Clara crouched down on the other side of the bull. She looked at his eyes, slightly glazed, reactive but slow. She looked at his tongue. She pressed carefully along his belly. "He's not injured," she said. "This is internal. Either bad water or bad feed." She stood. "We need Dr. Hansen. Now. And move the rest of the herd away from the secondary trough until we know." "Hansen's in Abilene," Pete said. "Won't be back until—" "Who's the nearest after him?" "Denny Walsh out near Sagebrush Creek, but Walsh and Carter Ranch have a—" Pete glanced at Nathan. "Walsh and I had a disagreement 4 years ago," Nathan said flat. "Then you're going to have to get over it," Clara said. Over it," Clara said. "Because that bull is worth more to this ranch than whatever happened 4 years ago." Nathan looked at her. She looked back. She didn't flinch. "Pete," Nathan said. "Ride for Walsh." Pete went. Nathan stayed with the bull. Clara went to the secondary trough. She crouched beside it and smelled the water and looked at the sediment along the bottom and found what she'd been afraid of finding: a dead field mouse small tucked against the drainage corner, decomposing in a way that had been going on for at least 3 days. Long enough to contaminate the whole trough. Long enough for the bull to have drunk it multiple times. She went back to Nathan. "Contaminated water," she said. "A rodent. I should have checked it again this week. I put it on the list and then the letter came and—" She stopped. "I should have checked it." Nathan looked at her. "You didn't cause this," he said. "I might have prevented it." "Clara." His voice was firm, not unkind. "Don't do that. Not now." She pressed her lips together and nodded and crouched beside the bull and stayed there. Walsh arrived 2 hours later. He was a compact man, 50s, with the unhurried movements of someone who'd been working with animals his whole life and understood that panic didn't help them. He didn't say anything about the 4-year disagreement. He just looked at the bull and started his examination. Clara stood back and let him work. After a while he straightened. "Toxic contamination in the water. He's a strong animal, which is what's keeping him on this side." Walsh looked at Nathan. "I can treat him. But it's going to be 2 weeks before I'd trust him in the field again. Maybe 3. 2 weeks. Nathan said nothing. Clara did the math. In 12 days, they needed the money from the land sale. In 2 weeks, the bank would already have acted. The bull's recovery time was almost irrelevant to that calculation, except that a sick bull meant the remaining herd's long-term value dropped, which meant the land sale needed to generate more, not less. "What's the treatment cost?" she said. Walsh named a number. It wasn't enormous, but it wasn't nothing either. Nathan nodded once. "Do it." Walsh went to his bag. Nathan stood up and walked 10 paces away and stood with his back to everyone, his hands at his sides, and Clara watched the set of his shoulders and understood that he was at the edge of something not breaking. Nathan Carter didn't break easily, but standing close enough to the edge to feel the drop. She walked over. She stood beside him. Not in front of him, not facing him, just beside him, looking in the same direction. "It's still manageable," she said quietly. "Is it?" he said. Not a question. "The bull was always a risk factor we didn't control. It changes the math, but it doesn't end it." She paused. "The land sale letter went out 8 days ago. We should hear back this week. And if we don't, then we make a different plan." "What plan?" She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know yet," she said. "But I haven't run out of options and I don't intend to." He turned his head and looked at her. Close at that distance, closer than they usually stood, and she saw the tiredness in his face, that he didn't let most people see, the specific exhaustion of a man who had been holding something up by himself for a very long time. "Why are you still here?" he said. The question landed strangely. My contract, she started. That's not what I mean, he said. Connors offered you 3 times your wage. The work out here is hard, and the situation is bad, and you have a son in town, and you could... He stopped. You could leave. Anyone reasonable would. She looked at him. I don't leave things in the middle, she said. Clara. And I want this ranch to survive, she said. Not just because it's the job. Because... She stopped herself. Because what? He said. She looked away. Because it deserves to, she said finally. Because your father built something real, and you've been fighting for it alone, and it deserves to survive. The silence stretched between them. That's the only reason, he said. She didn't answer. And the moment she didn't answer was the moment she knew she was in trouble, because she'd always been very good at answering questions. The response to her letter came on the 10th day. A land agent named Caldwell Morrison, representing a railroad land acquisition concern out of San Antonio, was interested in the East Quarter. Very interested. He named a price, $380, and said he could have a representative at Carter Ranch within the week for a formal inspection. Clara read the letter twice. Then she went to find Nathan. He was at the barn. She handed him the letter without preamble. He read it. She watched his face. $380. Enough to clear the banknote with $140 left over, a genuine buffer. An actual chance to come out of this, not just intact, but in a position to rebuild properly. He read it 3 times. The East Quarter, he said. Yes. My father's land. Yes. He folded the letter, held it. If I sell it, he said. That's it. There's no taking it back, she said. I know. He bought it for me. I know that. He thought... Nathan's jaw worked. He thought it was going to be what saved the ranch eventually, some kind of future resource. It is saving the ranch, Clara said gently. Just faster than he planned. He was quiet. Nathan, she said, your father bought that land because he loved this ranch and he loved you. If he were standing here right now looking at those numbers and looking at that letter, what do you think he'd tell you? A long silence. Nathan's hand tightened around the folded letter. He'd tell me to stop being sentimental about dirt, he said roughly. He'd tell me the ranch is worth more than any single piece of it. Yes, she said. He was very still. Write to Morrison, he said. Tell him to come. She took the letter back. She held his gaze for one moment. You're doing the right thing, she said. Don't, he said, but not unkindly. Just write the letter. She wrote the letter. Morrison's representative arrived 4 days later, which meant 10 days into the 14-day window. His name was Gerald Hatch, and he was a city man, smooth, efficient, the kind of man who looked at land the way bankers looked at ledgers, as a column of numbers arranged in space. He walked the East Quarter with Nathan and Clara, and Pete asked precise questions, made notes in a small book, and returned to the ranch house with the manner of someone who had already made his decision and was simply confirming the paperwork. The survey reading checks out, Hatch said. Morrison will honor the offer, $380. We can have the transfer documents prepared within 4 days, Clara said. Hatch looked at her. We have a bank obligation due in 4 days, she said. We need the transfer complete and funds in hand before then. Hatch considered this. That's a tight timeline. I'm aware, she said. I'll need to confirm with Morrison. Then confirm with him today, she said pleasantly. We'll have our signatures ready. Hatch looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at Clara. Something moved through Nathan's expression, the same something she'd been trying not to see for 2 weeks, trying not to name. You heard her, Nathan said to Hatch. On the day the papers were signed, Clara was in town. She hadn't planned to be, or rather, she had planned it because there was one more piece of business that she'd been turning over in her mind for 2 weeks, and that needed to be done, and this was the day to do it. She went to Gerald Finch's pawn shop. Finch was behind the counter where he always was, with his particular expression of mild boredom that she'd come to understand was just how his face sat. Mrs. Whitfield, he said. Mr. Finch. She set $3 on the counter. The pocket watch and the ring. Finch looked at the money, looked at her. The watch sold, he said. 3 weeks ago. The floor didn't move, but it felt like it did. To who? She said. Finch shrugged. Man passing through. Don't know his name. Clara stood very still. The ring, it turned out, was still there. Finch produced it from a tray under the counter, and she recognized it immediately. The thin gold band she'd worn for 5 years, the one Daniel had put on her finger in front of 30 people in her mother's sister's garden. She paid the $1 and put the ring in her pocket. She walked back out into the street. The watch was gone. She had known somewhere in the back of her mind that this was a risk she'd taken the moment she set it on Finch's counter. She'd known it, and she'd done it anyway, because Eli needed medicine more than she needed a piece of metal, and that was the right decision. She stood by it. But standing by the right decision didn't mean the loss didn't cost something. She stood on the boardwalk for a moment and pressed the ring through the fabric of her pocket with her thumb. Then she went to get Eli. She'd planned to bring him back to Mrs. Pratt's for another night. But Eli looked at her in the particular way. He had the way that saw past whatever expression she was wearing, and said, "Something happened." And she said, "I'll tell you about it sometime." And he said, "You can tell me now." And she sat on Mrs. Pratt's back step and told him about the watch. He was quiet for a while. "Papa would have said to sell it," he said finally. "I know. He would have said—" Eli screwed up his face, doing an impression that was surprisingly accurate of a man he'd last seen at 4 years old. "He would have said you carry the person, not the thing." Clara looked at her son. "He said that to you," she said. "Once, when I was sad that my wooden horse broke." Eli looked at his hands. "He said things can be replaced, but people can't, and it matters more to carry the person with you than to carry something that belonged to them." She was very quiet. "That's exactly what he would have said," she said. Eli leaned against her shoulder. They sat there in the late afternoon, and she didn't cry because she'd learned to do that in private, but she breathed very carefully and evenly for a little while. "Mama," Eli said. Is the ranch going to be all right?" She looked down at him. "Yes," she said. "Is the man, Mr. Carter, is he nice?" She thought about that. "He's a good man," she said. "He's had a hard few years, and he doesn't always know how to ask for help, but he's good." Eli was quiet, processing this. "Like you," he said. She blinked. "What?" "He sounds like you," Eli said with the absolute confidence of a 6-year-old who has observed something and is certain he's right. "You're good, but you don't always know how to ask for help either." She looked at her son for a long moment. "Go get your things," she said. "I'm taking you back to Mrs. Pratt's." He went. She sat on the step for another moment, and she thought that sometimes children said things so accurate they were almost uncomfortable, and she thought about Nathan standing at the barn door that morning, looking at the signed transfer papers with an expression that was all at once relieved and grief-stricken, and something else she hadn't let herself look at too directly. She walked Eli back to Mrs. Pratt's, kissed him, and rode back to the ranch. Nathan was at the kitchen table when she came in. He had a glass in front of him, not whiskey, just water, but he was holding it the way men held glasses when they needed something to do with their hands. He looked up when she came through the door. "How's your boy?" he said. "Good. Growing." She hung up her shawl. "The papers went through?" "Hatch confirmed. Funds by Friday." "Friday's within the window." "Yes." He turned the glass. "Clara." She turned. I was looking at her with an expression she'd been seeing develop piece by piece over the past 3 weeks, and she'd been deliberately not adding the pieces together because the sum of them was something she wasn't sure what to do with. "Sit down," he said. She sat down. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I need you to just let me say it before you respond." She waited. "I hired you because Briggs pointed to you, and you told me to judge your hands and not your size," he said. "And I thought I was doing you a charity, taking a chance on someone nobody else would take a chance on." He stopped, jaw tight. "That was arrogant. And it was wrong. And I've been ashamed of it for about 2 weeks. Clara was very still. You didn't come here and perform the job I hired you for, Nathan said. You came here and saved this ranch. You outmaneuvered Connors. You handled the bank. You thought of the land sale. He stopped again. You sat beside a sick bull in the rain and didn't complain once. It wasn't raining, she said. Clara. I know what you're saying, she said. Nathan. He looked at her. You don't owe me an apology for the first look you gave me in Briggs's store, she said. Everybody gives me that look. I've stopped counting them. She paused. What matters is every look after that one. He was quiet. Every look after that one has been different, she said. And she said it simply as a fact, without letting any more weight into it than was honest. Nathan set down the glass. I know this isn't... He stopped. Tried again. I'm aware that you came here for wages and for your son, and not for another stop. Nathan, she said, don't say something you're going to need to take back. He looked at her. I don't want to take it back, he said. The kitchen was very quiet. The fire was low. Outside, Pete was doing the evening check. She could hear the far sounds of it, the cattle settling. Somewhere to the north, very faint something that might have been thunder in the distance, the first hint of the weather that had been threatening for days. What do you want to say? She said. He reached across the table. He set his hand over hers. Not gripping, not urgent. Just there, warm and certain. That I don't want you to leave when the month is up, he said. She looked at his hand on hers. She thought about Vera Hadley and her careful words. She thought about Connors and the look he'd given her in the kitchen garden. She thought about every person in Millhaven who'd watched her walk through their town and made their calculation and found her wanting. She thought about Eli saying he sounds like you. She thought about Daniel's pocket watch somewhere on a road between here and everywhere being carried by a stranger. The month ends in 11 days, she said. I know, he said. The ranch isn't going to be stable in 11 days, not fully. The cattle still need to make market. The west fence still needs a second reinforcement. The pantry needs restocking before fall, and the well crank needs... Clara, he said. She stopped. I was looking at her with the particular look steady and direct, and something that had no performance in it at all, no calculation, just a man looking at a woman and meaning it all the way through. Stay, he said. She didn't answer, not because she didn't know what she wanted to say, but because the thunder in the north got suddenly significantly louder, and Pete burst through the kitchen door 2 seconds later, hat in hand and face white. There's a fire, Pete said. The old dry grass along the creek bed. Wind's coming south. Nathan was on his feet. How close, he said. Half mile, Pete said. Moving fast. Nathan looked at Clara. She was already standing. The cattle, she said. East gate. Move them north away from the creek. I'll get the water barrels and the sacks. Clara. Go, she said. Both of you. Go. They went. She ran to the barn. The next 3 hours were the most frightening of her time at Carter Ranch. Not because of the fire itself. The fire stayed on the creek bedside. The wind didn't shift the way she'd feared it might, and the cattle were moved safely before the smoke reached the east pasture. But because of what happened in the middle of it. Nathan, moving the last of the cattle through the east gate, took a fence rail at full speed in the dark and went down hard. She heard Pete shout. She crossed the yard at a run. Nathan was up by the time she got there. He was Nathan. He was always up, but he was holding his left arm against his chest, and his face was doing something controlled and white that she recognized as a man managing serious pain. I'm fine, he said. You're not fine, she said. She looked at the arm. Can you move your fingers? He moved them. Slowly. She watched. Not broken, she said. But you've done something to the shoulder. Move your arm out. She watched him try. Don't. Stop. She looked at Pete. Get the sacking and tie his arm against his chest. He keeps that arm still tonight, or we'll have something broken by morning. I can help with the... You can help by standing still, she said. Pete can manage the last of it. I'll help Pete. Clara. Nathan. She met his eyes. She was closer than the practical situation required, and she could see the pain underneath the control, and the frustration underneath the pain, and underneath all of it, something else. Let someone help you. He went very still. All right, he said, quietly, like it cost him something. All right, she said. She stepped back and went to help Pete. The fire burned itself out along the creek bed by midnight. The cattle were safe. The ranch was intact. The water barrels were half empty, but that was replaceable. When it was over, Pete went to the bunkhouse without being told. Clara and Nathan stood in the yard in the dark with the smell of smoke still in the air, and he was holding his arm against his chest and looking at her, and she was looking back. You said stay, she said. I did, he said. I haven't answered yet, she said. I know, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about 11 days and $4 a month and a 6-year-old boy who built ranches out of sticks, and a pocket watch she'd never see again, and a ring in her pocket, and the specific, terrifying, wonderful feeling of standing somewhere that was beginning to feel against all reasonable expectation, like it might be home. Ask me again, she said. When the cattle make market, when the note is clear, when the ranch is on its feet. He looked at her. You want to be sure I still ask, he said. I want to be sure, she said, that when I answer, neither of us is making a decision because we're exhausted and scared and standing in a yard that almost caught fire. He was quiet. Then he said, That's fair. She nodded. She went inside. She did not sleep for a long time. But when she did, it was the deep and dreamless sleep of someone who has made up her mind, even if she hasn't said it out loud yet. The morning after the fire, Clara found Nathan already at the kitchen table when she came out at 5. His arm was strapped against his chest, the way she and Pete had bound it the night before. He was holding his coffee cup in his right hand and looking at the ledger she'd left open on the table, not reading it exactly, just looking at it, the way people looked at things they were thinking around rather than about. He heard her and looked up. You didn't sleep, she said. I slept some. She went to the stove. The fire was already going, which meant he'd built it one-handed in the dark before she was up, which was exactly the kind of thing she'd expected him to do, and also exactly the kind of thing she'd told him not to do. She didn't say anything about it. She put the coffee on and got the bread started and let the morning settle around them. The bull is better, Nathan said. I checked this morning. You shouldn't have been out there with that shoulder. The bull's better, he said again, as if that settled the question of whether he should have been out there. She turned around and looked at him. He looked back. There was something almost ordinary about it, this particular exchange, this specific quality of him doing the thing she'd just said not to do, and her knowing he'd do it, and neither of them making a production of it. It felt she thought, and then immediately stopped thinking, like something that had been happening for years. How's the pain? She said. Manageable. Nathan. It's manageable, he said firmer. I've had worse. She brought his coffee refilled and set it in front of him and sat down across the table. Morrison's funds will clear by Friday, she said. That's 5 days. The bank note is due in 4. He looked at her. I know, he said. I'm going to ride to Mill Haven today and speak to Greer personally, she said. Show him the transfer confirmation from Hatch. Ask him to hold 24 hours past the deadline, given documented proof of incoming funds. Greer may not. Greer is a reasonable man in a town that needs this ranch to survive, she said. He knows what happens to Mill Haven's economy if Carter Ranch goes under. I'm going to remind him of that in the most professional possible terms. Nathan was quiet for a moment. You were going to do this whether I agreed or not, he said. I was going to ask you first, she said. But yes. He picked up his coffee. Take Pete with you, he said. I know you don't need him, Nathan said. Take him anyway. She looked at him. He looked back. Something in the set of his jaw that wasn't about her competence, she knew that now had learned the difference between the look that doubted her and the look that simply didn't want her alone on the road between the ranch and town, with Connors still out there and unresolved. All right, she said. Greer received her in his office with the careful courtesy of a man who had already heard about the previous night's fire. Small towns moved information faster than telegraph wire, and who was doing the math of his own position in this situation. She laid the Hatch confirmation letter on his desk and walked him through it without preamble. $380, she said. Transfer confirmed, funds expected Friday. The note is due Thursday. I'm asking for a one-day extension in writing in exchange for documented proof of incoming payment. Greer looked at the letter. This is a railroad land concern, he said. Yes. Morrison's group has a sound reputation. They do. I verified it. He looked at her. You verified it. Through the Austin Land Office Registry, Morrison's group has completed 14 land acquisitions in the past 3 years, all fully funded, all on time. She met his eyes. The money is real, Mr. Greer. It's coming. I'm asking you for 24 hours. Greer leaned back in his chair. He tapped the letter once with 2 fingers. The regional office, he said carefully, has taken an interest in this account. The regional office's interest, Clara said just as carefully, was triggered by a complaint about collateral valuation. The collateral situation has changed materially since that complaint was filed. The sale of the East Quarter at $380, well above any valuation the complaining party might have submitted, demonstrates that. She paused. If the bank forecloses on a note that was going to be paid in full 24 hours later because of a regional flag that was triggered by a competitor's bad faith complaint, that's the kind of thing that becomes a story. The kind of story that makes its way to the Austin papers. The silence in Greer's office was absolute. He looked at her for a long time. Then he opened his desk drawer, took out a piece of paper, and began to write. One day, he said. Not a minute more. That's all I need, Clara said. Pete was waiting outside with the horses. When she came out and he read her expression, he let out a long breath. Done, he said. Done, she said. He held the mare while she mounted. As they turned toward the ranch road, Pete said without looking at her, You know, when Mr. Carter first brought you out, I thought. He stopped. I know what you thought, she said. Yes, ma'am. A pause. I was wrong. She looked at him. Pete Ellery was not a man who said that kind of thing easily. She could see what it cost him, not much, but something, and she appreciated both the cost and the payment. Thank you, Pete, she said. He nodded once, and they rode back toward the ranch. On Friday the funds cleared. Clara rode to town with Nathan. His shoulder was still strapped, but he sat his horse like the injury was a minor inconvenience, which she suspected was partly true and partly sheer stubbornness, and they walked into the Southern Cattle Bank together, and she set the transfer confirmation on Greer's counter, and Nathan set $240 in banknotes beside it, the proceeds from Morrison's payment minus the operating reserve she'd calculated to the dollar. Greer counted it, signed the receipt, stamped the account ledger. He slid the stamped document across the counter. Nathan picked it up. He looked at it for a moment. Clara watched his face. She saw the thing that moved through it. Not triumph, not the particular satisfaction of winning something. Something quieter. Something that looked like grief and relief arriving at the same moment, because the thing you'd been fighting so long to save was finally safe, and the safety of it made the fighting real in a way that the fighting itself hadn't. Mr. Carter, Greer said with the manner of a man who had reconsidered his position on something, I'd like to say this bank values its relationship with Carter Ranch. We look forward to continuing it. Nathan looked at him. Thank you, Mr. Greer, he said. His voice was even. He turned and walked out. Clara nodded to Greer and followed. Outside. Nathan stood on the boardwalk with the stamped document in his hand, and the July sun. A month had passed. Now it was August. She realized the month had passed, coming down on both of them, and he didn't say anything for a while. She waited. It's done, he said. It's done, she agreed. He looked at her. You said to ask you again, he said. When the cattle made market, when the note was clear, when the ranch was on its feet. She felt her heart do something it had been practicing for several weeks. The cattle haven't made market yet, she said. The note is clear. 2 out of 3. He looked at her sideways. You're going to make me wait for all three. I'm going to make us both be sure, she said. There's a difference. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he tucked the document into his coat, settled his hat, and offered his right arm, his good arm. Walk with me to the feed store, he said. We need to resupply. She took his arm. They walked down the main street of Millhaven together in broad daylight, and she was aware of the glances the merchant's wife outside the dry goods store, the two men at the feed store hitching post, Vera Hadley coming out of the post office and stopping short. She did not look at any of them. She looked at the road ahead. It was Vera Hadley who spoke first. Clara, she said. And then, with the particular tone of a woman rearranging what she thought she knew, Mr. Carter. Nathan tipped his hat. Mrs. Hadley. Vera looked at Clara's hand on Nathan's arm, looked at their faces. And whatever she'd come to say, whatever carefully structured observation she'd been composing, seemed to rearrange itself into something simpler. I heard about the fire, she said. And the bank. She stopped. I'm glad it worked out. Thank you, Clara said. Vera looked at her. Something moved across her face, not the calculated pity of the kitchen visit, something more honest and a little ashamed. You did good work, Vera said, quietly. People are saying so. Clara looked at her. Thank you, Vera, she said. And she meant it without bitterness, which was its own kind of victory. Vera went on. They went on. And Nathan said nothing about it, which was exactly right. What happened the following Tuesday was not something Clara had planned for. She was in town to collect Eli. She'd arranged for him to come to the ranch for a few days, which Eli had received with the enthusiasm of a child who had been building a stick ranch for a month and was finally going to see a real one when she walked past the general store and heard her name. Not her full name, just Clara. Said inside the store by a voice she recognized. Wade Connors. She stopped. She wasn't proud of it, but she stopped. Managed to hold on, I'll grant that, Connors was saying. But it won't last. Carter doesn't have the head for it, and once the woman moves on. She's been there a month. Briggs's voice, careful. She's an employee, Connors said. She'll move on, they always do. And when she does that, ranch goes back to what it was. A pause. I'm a patient man, Briggs. Clara pushed through the door. Both men looked at her. Briggs went very still. Connors looked at her with the particular expression of a man who has been caught saying something and is deciding whether to pretend he wasn't. Mrs. Whitfield, he said. Mr. Connors, she said. She walked to the counter, picked up the supply list she'd come for, set her coins down, and looked at Briggs. That full order, please, including the extra chain for the well crank. Briggs began pulling items. Clara turned to face Connors. I appreciate patience in a man, she said pleasantly. It's a useful quality, but I'd encourage you to find something else to be patient about. Carter Ranch is going to be here a long time. Connors smiled, that practiced smile. Is that so? The note's been cleared, she said. The cattle are on track for late summer market. The operation is stable. She met his eyes. And I'm not going anywhere. Something shifted in Connors' expression, just slightly, recalculating again the way she'd seen him do it before. We'll see, he said. We will, she agreed. She picked up her supplies, nodded to Briggs, and walked out. Her hands were perfectly steady. She didn't let them shake until she was outside and around the corner. Then she stood against the wall for 10 seconds breathing. Just breathing. Then she went to get Eli. Eli's arrival at Carter Ranch was one of the better things that had happened in a difficult month. He came in from the ride with his eyes wide and his mouth slightly open, which was his expression for things that were bigger than he'd expected, and he stood in the yard and turned in a slow circle, looking at all of it. The barn, the pasture, the cattle in the distance, and then he looked at Clara and said, "It's real." "What did you think it would be?" she said. "I don't know, but realer than my sticks." Nathan came out of the barn. Eli looked at him. Nathan was tall and broad-shouldered and had the kind of presence that made children either run to him or edge behind their mothers. Eli edged slightly behind Clara and then stood his ground, which was entirely characteristic. Nathan crouched down. This was something Clara had not expected, the ease of it, the naturalness. Nathan Carter, crouching down in the dirt to put himself at a 6-year-old's level. "You must be Eli," he said. "Yes, sir," Eli said. "Your mother tells me you've been building a ranch." Eli's eyes widened slightly. "She told you about that?" "She did. Said you were using stones for cattle. And sticks for the fence," Eli said, relaxing incrementally. "The fence is the hard part. You have to get the tension right, or the whole line goes crooked." Nathan looked at him with an expression that Clara recognized, the same expression he'd had when she told him about grazing rotation, the look of a man who has just revised his estimate of who he's talking to. "You're right about that," Nathan said. "You want to see the real fence?" Eli looked at Clara. "Go on," she said. He went. She stood in the yard and watched Nathan Carter walk her son toward the fence line, the tall man and the small boy. And she stayed very still and let herself feel what she was feeling without doing anything about it. It was a considerable amount of feeling. The 3 days Eli spent at the ranch rearranged something, not in a way Clara could have predicted or planned for. Eli had a gift she'd always known. This Daniel had had it too, for walking into a situation and making it tell the truth about itself. He asked Nathan questions that Clara had never asked because she'd been too careful, too professional, too aware of the line between employer and employee. He asked them with the absolute confidence of a child who doesn't know that certain questions aren't asked. "Do you miss your papa?" Eli said on the second evening. They were on the back step. Nathan had shown Eli how to check the evening water levels, and now they were sitting in the last of the light, Eli eating an apple and Nathan drinking his coffee. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Clara, inside at the stove, heard everything through the open window. "I do," Nathan said. "I miss my papa too," Eli said with the directness of a child who has processed grief differently than adults, do not in buried layers, but in clean occasional acknowledgement. "Mama keeps his ring now. She got it back." A pause. "Good," Nathan said quietly. "She sold it to buy my medicine," Eli said. "And then she got it back when she could." He ate his apple. "She does that. She gives things away when people need them, and then she finds a way to get them back." Nathan was quiet. "She does," he said. And the way he said it was the way people spoke about something they'd been thinking about for a long time. "Mr. Carter," Eli said. "Eli. Are you going to ask my mama to stay?" The silence from outside was so complete that Clara heard her own heartbeat. "I'm working up to it," Nathan said. Eli appeared to find this acceptable. "Okay," he said, and went back to the apple. Clara stood very still at the stove. She was smiling before she decided to. The cattle went to market on the 3rd week of August. Pete drove them. Nathan rode alongside, his shoulder healed enough now for the full range of movement, though Clara had watched him flex it carefully every morning for 2 weeks, like he was testing something that might still fail. It didn't fail. She stayed at the ranch with Eli, who had gone back to Mrs. Pratt's for another week, and then come back because Mrs. Pratt said he was underfoot, and might as well be underfoot somewhere with more space. Clara did the accounts. She restocked the pantry for fall. She fixed the chicken coop door properly this time with new hinges from the supply run, and she sat on the back step in the evenings with Eli and watched the light change over the east pasture and tried not to count the days until Nathan came back. She was counting them anyway. He came back on a Thursday. She heard the horses before she saw them, and she was in the yard before she'd quite decided to be, and Nathan rode through the gate, looking tired in the bone-deep way of a long drive well completed, and he looked at her standing in the yard, and his whole face changed. He dismounted. He handed the reins to Pete without looking at Pete. He walked to her. $320, he said. Market was strong. She felt the number land. That's, she calculated instantly. After the note payment, the sale reserve operating costs, about $90 a head, he said, going into fall. She breathed. $90, real money, a buffer, a beginning. "Nathan," she said. "I know," he said. They stood in the yard, and she was very aware of how close they were standing, which was closer than practical, and she didn't step back. "The cattle made market," she said. "They did. The note is clear. Since Friday. And the ranch." She looked around. The solid house. The repaired fence line. The kitchen garden with actual things growing in it. Now things she'd put in the ground with her own hands. The chicken coop with its proper door. Pete heading to the barn with the practiced ease of a man who knew exactly where he belonged. The ranch is on its feet. "All three," Nathan said. She looked at him. How was looking at her, the way he'd been looking at her for weeks, the way she'd been choosing not to fully meet, but she met it now. "Clara Whitfield," he said. "I am going to ask you something, and I need you to know that I'm asking it because I mean it, not because I'm tired and relieved and standing in a yard that almost caught fire a month ago." "I know," she said. "I mean it in the morning," he said. "I mean it when the work is hard. I mean it when—" He stopped, started again. "I mean it all the way through." She looked at him. She thought about the pawn shop and the 15 cents, and the first day she'd walked onto this property and cataloged everything that was wrong with it. She thought about the ledger books and the bank meeting and Connor's face when the cattle came back through the gate. She thought about Eli on the back step saying he sounds like you. She thought about Daniel and the ring in her pocket and the fact that carrying a person meant carrying forward, not standing still. "Ask me," she said. "Will you stay?" Nathan said. "Not as an employee, not on a contract. Just stay. Build this with me." He paused. "You and Eli both." The yard was quiet. Somewhere in the barn, Pete was whistling something off-key. "Eli already said yes," she said. Nathan blinked. He told me 2 days ago," she said. Unprompted. "He said, 'Mama, I think we should stay here.' Then he went back to fixing the chicken coop." Nathan stared at her. "He helped you fix the chicken coop," he said. "He handed me the nails," she said. He was very serious about it. Something that had been tightly held in Nathan Carter's face came loose all at once, and he laughed a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere that hadn't been open in a while, and it was, she thought, the best sound she'd heard in a long time. "Clara," he said when he could. "Yes," she said. "We'll stay." He reached out and took her hand. Both hands hers in his, and he held them the way he'd set his hand over hers at the kitchen table weeks ago. Certain steady, like he'd made up his mind and wasn't surprised by it. "I'm not good at this," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not either. We'll figure it out." "We generally do," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, and then carefully, like a man who was very aware of what he was doing and had decided to do it anyway, he lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. Old-fashioned, the way men did things in the world they'd both grown up in. Formal and sincere at the same time. She felt it all the way through. "Stay for supper," she said. "You look like you haven't eaten properly in 4 days." "3, he said. "Nathan." 3.5, he admitted. She shook her head and went inside, and she heard him follow, and she heard Eli's voice from somewhere around the side of the house. He'd been building something out back. She'd given up trying to track what, and Nathan called out to him, and Eli came running, and she stood at the stove and started supper, and the sounds of the ranch settled around her like something that had always been there. But the thing about Forward was that it didn't always move in a straight line. The following week brought Connors back, not to the ranch. Somewhere more deliberate and more damaging to the Millhaven Ladies' Auxiliary Autumn Gathering, which Clara had attended at Vera Hadley's specific invitation, which was itself something of a recalibration of the social order, and which Clara had accepted because she understood what Vera was trying to do and respected the effort. She'd worn her better dress and pinned her hair and gone. And for the first hour it had been fine, better than fine actually, because Vera had introduced her with something approaching genuine warmth, and several women Clara had barely exchanged 2 words with had made a point of speaking to her, asking about the ranch, asking about Eli. And then Connors's wife had arrived. Margaret Connors was not a cruel woman in the way her husband was cruel. She was something more intricate. A woman who had absorbed her husband's view of the world so completely that it felt to her like her own, who could say devastating things in a social register that sounded almost like concern. She found Clara by the punch table. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said with a smile, "I've been wanting to speak to you. We all think what you did for Carter Ranch was very admirable." "Thank you," Clara said. "Of course everyone's wondering what happens now," Margaret said pleasantly, "with the ranch stable, whether Mr. Carter will be looking for more permanent arrangements for his household." A pause. "Someone more suited to a long-term role." Clara looked at her. "I imagine he'll sort that out himself," she said. "Of course. It's just—" Margaret tilted her head. "Well, you must know how people talk. A man in his position, a woman in yours. It's natural for people to wonder if he isn't being generous. Out of gratitude." The room had gotten slightly quieter. Not because people had stopped talking, but because the women nearest them had. Clara set down her cup. She was not going to say what she felt like saying. She was not going to give Margaret Connors the satisfaction of a scene. But she was not going to be quiet either. "Mrs. Connors," she said with perfect evenness, "I saved Carter Ranch through 4 weeks of 12-hour days, 1 bank negotiation, a livestock law. I found in an agricultural bulletin and a land sale I arranged while managing a sick bull and a fire, and your husband's attempts to dismantle the operation piece by piece." She paused. "If Mr. Carter is grateful, it's because gratitude is an appropriate response to competent work. And if he's made me any additional offers, that's a matter between the two of us and no one else." She looked at Margaret steadily. "Is there something else you wanted to say?" Margaret's smile was entirely still. The room was very quiet. "No," Margaret said. "No, I think that covers it." She moved away. Vera Hadley appeared at Clara's elbow. "Good Lord," Vera said very quietly. "I may have made an enemy," Clara said. "She was already your enemy," Vera said. "You just made her a respectful one." A pause. "Have some more punch." Clara picked up her cup. Her hands were steady. She was rather proud of that. She told Nathan about it that evening. He listened without interrupting, which she appreciated. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I should go and—" he started. "You should do nothing," she said. "It's handled." "Clara, if you ride over to Connors on my behalf, it tells everyone that I needed riding over to Connors on my behalf," she said. "It undoes the point." She looked at him. "I can fight my own battles. I've been doing it since before you knew I existed." He looked at her. "I know you can," he said. "That's not why I want to." She looked at him. "Then why?" she said. He met her eyes. "Because you shouldn't have to," he said. "Not anymore, not by yourself." The kitchen was very quiet. She understood what he was saying. Not just the words. The whole of it. The thing underneath the words. The offer that was bigger than the words. "I know," she said. She reached across the table and set her hand on his. He turned his hand over and held hers. They stayed like that for a while, the fire low, the ranch quiet around them. The particular piece of a day that had been hard in several directions and was ending well anyway. "Nathan," she said. "The ring," she said. "Daniel's ring. I've been carrying it." He was still. "I know what that means," she said. "And I don't want you to think I'm not sure. I am sure." She paused. "But I needed you to know it's there, that I carry it." He looked at her. "I'd think less of you if you didn't," he said. She looked at him. "He was Eli's father," Nathan said. "He was your husband. That doesn't disappear. It shouldn't." He held her gaze. "I'm not asking you to put him down. I'm asking you to let me walk beside you." She was very quiet. She thought she had been prepared for this moment. She'd been preparing for it for weeks in the careful, private way she prepared for things, thinking through what she'd say and how she'd say it and what it would mean. She hadn't been prepared for him to say exactly the right thing. "Nathan Carter," she said. "Clara Whitfield," he said. "You are considerably better at this than you claimed," she said. Something moved through his face. Not quite a smile. The thing that lived next door to a smile. "Don't tell anyone," he said. "I have a reputation." She laughed. And the sound of it filled the kitchen, and the fire crackled, and somewhere outside, Eli was probably still awake when he shouldn't be, and the ranch was quiet and solid and real, and everything that had been broken was not yet fully mended, but was on its way, which was the most honest version of good. 3 months after Clara Whitfield walked into Carter Ranch with $2 and a sick child, and a list of everything that needed fixing, the first frost came. She felt it before she saw it in the particular stillness of the air at 4 in the morning, in the way the ranch went quiet, in a different way than summer quiet, something that had weight and intention to it. She lay on her cot for the moment and listened to it, and then she got up, because frost meant the kitchen garden needed covering, and the water troughs needed checking, and the cattle needed to be moved before the ground got hard. She was in the garden with the burlap covers before Nathan came looking for her. He found her crouched between the rows, tucking the edges down, and he stood at the garden gate for a moment without saying anything. "I would have helped," he said. "I was already up," she said. "Clara." "The tomatoes weren't going to wait," she said, and she heard him come through the gate and crouch beside her, and for a few minutes they worked without talking, covering things, protecting them from the cold, and it was the most domestic thing she'd ever done with another person since Daniel. And it felt, she thought, exactly as natural as it shouldn't have. "Eli's still asleep," Nathan said. "Good, let him sleep." "He was up late reading." "I know. I told him 1 more chapter, and he negotiated me up to 3. "He gets that from somewhere," Nathan said. She glanced at him. "He gets it from his father," she said. "Daniel could negotiate his way out of anything." Nathan accepted this in the way he'd learned to accept mentions of Daniel, not flinching, not performing ease, just taking it in as part of the whole of her. They finished the garden and stood up together, and he was close, the way he was often close, now that they'd stopped pretending there was a reason not to be. "Come inside," he said. "I'll make the coffee." "You make terrible coffee," she said. "I've been practicing." She looked at him. "Have you?" she said. "Pete says it's improved." "Pete is afraid of you." Nathan smiled, the full one, the one that had taken 6 weeks to earn the first glimpse of, and that she'd been quietly collecting ever since. "Come inside and judge for yourself." She went inside. The coffee was marginally better. She told him so, and he looked unreasonably pleased about it, and Eli came in 20 minutes later with his hair going in 4 directions, and his book still in his hand, and he sat at the table and ate his breakfast, and told them both with great authority everything he had learned from the previous night's reading about the migration habits of longhorn cattle, which Nathan listened to with the particular focused attention he gave to Eli. Not performing interest, actually interested. And Clara stood at the stove and thought that this was a thing she had not let herself want for a long time, this exact thing. And here it was anyway. Tom. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in late September. It came addressed to Clara, which was unusual enough that Pete handed it to her with a particular look, and she turned it over and read the return address, and felt the floor shift slightly under her. San Antonio. A law office she didn't recognize. She opened it at the table alone. Nathan out with the cattle, and Eli at his lessons, with Mrs. Pratt in town, 3 days a week now, because Clara had made that arrangement in August and was paying for it out of her wages. The letter was from an attorney named James Whitmore, representing the estate of a Gerald Finch. Gerald Finch, the pawnbroker. Gerald Finch had died in August, 2 weeks after Clara had stood at his counter and bought back Daniel's ring and walked out without the watch. The letter was very formal and very careful, and at its core said this: Gerald Finch in his final weeks had located the man who purchased Daniel Whitfield's pocket watch. The man, a traveling merchant named Cole passing through to San Antonio, had been tracked through a trade ledger Finch had kept. The watch had been recovered from Cole's estate when Cole himself died in September intestate with no heirs. The watch had been identified by Finch's records as having originated with a Mrs. Clara Whitfield of Millhaven, Texas. The watch was being held at Whitmore's office in San Antonio. Clara read the letter 3 times. She sat at the table for a long time. Gerald Finch, with his flat bored eyes and his 2-finger way of picking things up and his "that ain't my problem, ma'am." Gerald Finch, in the last weeks of his life, had tracked down a pocket watch that belonged to a woman he had no particular obligation to and arranged for its return. People she thought were surprising. She was still sitting there when Nathan came in. He read her face immediately. "What happened?" he said. She handed him the letter. He read it. She watched his face. "Daniel's watch," he said. "Yes." He set the letter down. "I'll take you to San Antonio," he said. "Nathan, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he said. "I want to." He held her gaze. "Let me." She looked at him. "All right," she said. They went to San Antonio at the end of the week, the three of them, Nathan, Clara, and Eli, who received the news that they were taking a trip with the focused intensity of a boy who had never been further than Millhaven and intended to observe everything. The road took 2 days. They stayed at a decent inn. The first night, Eli in a trundle bed beside Clara's room, Nathan in the room across the hall, and Clara lay awake for a while, listening to the sounds of a city she'd never quite gotten used to. Even San Antonio, at the edge of the frontier, had a different density to it. More people, more noise, more life pressing in from all sides. She thought about the watch. She thought about the morning she'd set it on Finch's counter, the way she hadn't let herself look at it after. The way grief worked not in stages the way people said, but in objects, in specific ordinary things that carried the weight of a person, and losing them was like losing a piece of the carrying, and getting them back was like... She didn't know yet what getting it back was like. She found out the next afternoon in James Whitmore's quiet office, when the attorney set a small cloth bag on his desk and slid it toward her. She opened it. The watch was exactly as she remembered. The silver case slightly worn at the edges. The engraving on the back, EW to JW. 1941. The initials of Nathan's great-grandparents. No Daniels, she corrected herself. Daniel's grandparents, the history she'd held in her hand every morning for 5 years. She opened the case. It was still running. Someone had wound it. Cole, maybe, or Finch, or someone between them. But it was still running, still keeping the time. It had always kept steady and indifferent to everything that had happened to it. She closed the case. She held it for a moment. Eli beside her was very still, in the way he was still when he understood something was important. He reached over and set his small hand on her arm. "Papa would say you carried the person," he said, "not the thing." She looked at her son. "I know," she said. "He would." "But it's nice to have the thing back too," Eli said with 6-year-old practicality. She laughed the way she'd been laughing more lately from somewhere real before she decided to. She pressed the watch into her pocket and took Eli's hand and stood up. Nathan was waiting in the hall. He looked at her face and understood, and he didn't say anything about it, just held the door and walked beside her out into the San Antonio afternoon. And she thought that this specific quality of being understood without having to explain was one of the things she hadn't known she needed until she had it. On the road back to Millhaven. The second day, Eli fell asleep in the wagon bed behind them, wrapped in the blanket Clara had packed his book face down on his chest. Clara and Nathan rode in the quiet that came after a child fell asleep, the particular relief of it tinged with affection. "Nathan," she said. I want to ask you something." "All right." She held the reins for a moment. "When you look at this ranch," she said, "when you think about what it could be, 5 years from now, 10, what do you see?" He was quiet. Not the avoidant quiet, the thinking quiet. "More cattle," he said. "The east field fully in rotation. Maybe a second hand besides Pete, someone younger who wants to learn." He paused. "A better kitchen garden." "The kitchen garden is fine," she said. "It's good," he said. "I said better." She glanced at him. The corner of his mouth was doing the thing. "What else?" she said. He looked at the road. "A family," he said, simply. The way he said things when he decided to say them, no preamble, no hedging. She felt the word settle. "Eli," he said. "You. Maybe more someday, if..." He stopped. "If that's something you'd want." She looked at the road ahead. "Ask me that one later," she said. When we're not moving. Fair enough, he said. They rode in silence for a while. Good silence, the kind that had room in it. Nathan, she said. Still here, he said. I want to tell you something. She kept her eyes on the road. When I walked into that general store and heard you say her that particular way you said it, I knew exactly what it meant. I've been hearing it my whole life. Different words, same meaning. He was very still beside her. I know, he said. I'm not telling you to make you feel bad about it, she said. I'm telling you because, she paused. Because the distance between that moment and this one is the distance I want you to understand. Not to apologize for. To understand. I understand it, he said. I've been thinking about it since about the third day you were on that ranch. What were you thinking? That I was the one who needed to be better, he said. Not you. You came in exactly as you were, and you were exactly enough. I was the one who needed to catch up. She looked at him. You caught up, she said. I'm still catching up, he said. But I'm working on it. She looked at the road ahead, at the wide flat Texas land, going gold in the September light, and she felt something settle in her that had been unsettled for a very long time. The twist that Clara hadn't seen coming arrived on a Monday morning in October, delivered by a writer from Millhaven, with a letter that had come on the stage from Austin. Nathan read it first. His face went through several things in quick succession, and then went carefully neutral, which was how she knew it was significant. He handed it to her without speaking. It was from the Southern Cattle Bank. Regional Office. Austin. She read it quickly. Arthur Greer had filed a formal complaint with the regional office regarding the handling of the Carter Ranch account acceleration. His complaint cited evidence of bad faith interference by an outside party in the collateral assessment evidence that the letter stated had been reviewed by the regional examiner and found to be credible. Wade Connors was named. The regional office was conducting a formal review of several accounts in the Millhaven district that had been flagged following complaints traceable to Connors's business interests. The bank was, the letter carefully stated, committed to ensuring that its processes served legitimate financial purposes and not competitive ones. The letter also stated that as a gesture of good faith during the review period, the Carter Ranch account would be classified as preferred standing, meaning the next renewal would carry a reduced interest rate. Clara read it twice. She looked at Nathan. Greer filed the complaint, she said. Apparently. Against Connors. Apparently. She thought about the afternoon she'd sat across from Greer and said very carefully the kind of story that makes its way to the Austin papers. She thought about Greer's face. She'd taken that as a threat she was making. She wondered now if it had been instead a door she'd opened that Greer had decided to walk through himself. He did it on his own, she said. Seems like, Nathan said. She sat with this. Connors is going to know it came from us, she said. It didn't come from us, Nathan said. It came from Greer. Connors won't see the difference. No, Nathan said. He won't. He looked at her steadily. Are you worried? She thought about it honestly. No, she said. Not anymore. Nathan nodded once. Neither am I, he said. Connors came to the ranch one last time. He came alone, which was different. He came in the middle of the afternoon on a Wednesday, and he rode up to the fence line and sat his horse and called out for Nathan in the way men called out for each other when they wanted the meeting on open ground. Nathan came out from the barn. Clara came out from the house. Connors looked at them both standing together, and something moved through his expression. Not defeat exactly, but the particular recalibration of a man who has decided to acknowledge that a situation has changed. Carter, he said. Connors, Nathan said. A pause. I'm going to say this once, Connors said. The bank business that's done. I'm not going to fight a regional review. Costs more than it's worth. He looked at Nathan steadily. I still think this ranch is overextended. I still think you'll have hard years ahead. Every ranch has hard years, Nathan said. True enough. Connors glanced at Clara. The look was different from any look he'd given her before. Not respectful exactly, not from a man like Connors, but something adjacent. Acknowledgement. You've got capable people around you, he said to Nathan. "I'll grant that." He turned his horse. "Good luck with the fall," he said, and rode out. Nathan stood at the fence and watched him go. "That's as close to a concession as he'll ever make," Clara said. "I know," Nathan said. "Are you satisfied with it?" He thought about it. Surprisingly, he said yes. She looked at him. "Because you don't need him to admit it," she said. "You already know." He turned and looked at her. "We already know," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then Pete called out from the barn that one of the new calves was being difficult, and Nathan went, and Clara went back to the kitchen, and the ranch continued its work, which was what ranches did. They continued through the hard parts and the good parts and everything in between. On a Saturday evening in late October, Nathan asked her to walk with him. Not to the cattle or the fence or any particular useful destination, just to walk. Eli was inside with a lamp and 3 books and had made it clear he did not intend to move for at least 2 hours. They walked the fence line of the east pasture, the one she'd helped repair in her first week, the one whose posts she'd helped set in the hard ground. The cattle were in for the night. The air was cool and clean and smelled like approaching winter. They walked for a while without talking. It was the best kind of quiet between them, now the kind that had been earned, that had been built from all the other kinds of quiet, the tense ones, and the sad ones, and the ones full of things they hadn't said yet. Nathan stopped. She stopped beside him. He turned to face her. In his right hand, the good hand, the one he'd always used for things that mattered, he held something small. She couldn't see it in the fading light at first. He opened his fingers. A ring. Not a grand thing. Not a jeweler's showpiece. A simple silver band, narrow and plain, with a small turquoise stone set flush into the metal. She recognized the stone turquoise from the Texas frontier. The kind of stone that local craftsmen worked with, nothing imported, nothing pretentious. "It belonged to my mother," he said. "My father gave it to her the year they claimed this land. He had it made in Millhaven from a stone he found on the East Quarter." He paused. "The East Quarter that's gone now, but the stone is still here." She looked at it. "Nathan," she said. "I'm not going to make a speech," he said. "You know I'm no good at speeches." "You're better than you think," she said. "Clara." He met her eyes, steady, certain. The same certainty that had been building in him for 4 months, the kind that didn't announce itself, just showed up and stayed. "You came to this ranch with nothing but your hands and your mind and your boy, and you saved everything I thought I was going to lose. And somewhere in the middle of that you became—" He stopped, started again. "You became the thing I would have lost that mattered most." She was very still. "I know what you carry," he said. "Daniel, the watch, the ring in your pocket. Eli, I know the weight of it. I'm not asking you to put any of it down." He held her gaze. "I'm asking you to let me carry it with you." She looked at him. She thought about the pawnbroker's counter and 15 cents, and a sick child, and a month's contract, and $4, and every morning since that had built into this one. She thought about a man who'd crouched down in the dirt to talk to her son, who'd sat on a step and told a 6-year-old the truth about missing his father, who'd filed the ledger pages she'd written out like they were worth the care, who'd said, "Let someone help you," and then slowly, painfully, imperfectly, had learned to do the same. She thought about Eli's voice. "He sounds like you." She thought about Daniel's watch running in her pocket, keeping time. She reached out and took the ring from his hand. She looked at it for a moment. Then she held it back out to him. He looked at her. "Put it on," she said. He looked at the ring in her extended hand, at her face, at the ring again. He took it. He took her left hand in his and slid the ring onto her finger carefully, the way he did things he meant, without hurry, without performance, with the complete and focused attention of a man who understood what he was doing and wanted to do it right. It fit. Of course it fit. She looked at it on her hand. The silver, the small turquoise stone, the stone from the land that had saved the ranch, the land that was gone now, but not lost. Still here, just changed the way things that matter always changed instead of disappearing. "Clara Carter," he said. She looked up at him. That's going to take some getting used to, she said. You've got time, he said. She stepped forward and put her arms around him. Not delicately, not carefully, the way she'd been moving around him for months. Just directly the way she did things when she'd decided to do them, and he put his arms around her and held on, and it was solid and real and warm, and she pressed her face against his shoulder and let herself be held, and she did not try to manage what she felt, or organize it or prepare for it. She just felt it. All of it. The loss and the work and the fear and the long months of keeping everything in order and the moment of seeing Eli run to Nathan across a yard and the ring in her pocket and the ring on her finger and the watch that had come back against all odds, and this man who had started with one wrong look and had been working every single day since to deserve a better one. She felt all of it, and she let it be as large as it actually was. Later, after Eli had been told and had received the news with the seriousness of a boy who has been considering a situation for some time and finds that events have confirmed his analysis after Pete had been told and had shaken Nathan's hand and nodded to Clara with the particular formality of a man expressing real emotion through formal channels. After the supper dishes were done and Eli was asleep and the ranch was quiet, Clara sat at the kitchen table with the ledger open in front of her. Not because there was urgent work. There wasn't. The accounts were in good order. The fall supplies were secured. The cattle were healthy. The fence was sound. She'd gone through everything twice that week, and it was all for the first time since she'd arrived simply fine. She sat at the ledger because it was where she thought best, and there was something she wanted to think about. Nathan came in from checking the cattle. He always did a last check every night. She'd learned the rhythm of it and saw her at the table. He sat down across from her. "What are you doing?" he said. "Thinking," she said. "What about—" She looked at the open ledger, at the neat columns she'd built from chaos, at the numbers that told the story of the past 4 months in the language she'd always trusted most concrete, precise, honest. "I was thinking about the morning I walked into Finch's shop," she said. "With the watch and the ring. I was 15 cents short for medicine, and I had nothing left to sell except those 2 things. She paused. "I thought that was the worst morning of my life." Nathan watched her. "And now," he said. "Now I think it was the beginning," she said. "I couldn't see it then. It felt like an ending, like I'd run out of everything. But I was just at the bottom of the hill." She looked at him. "You have to get all the way to the bottom before you can start going up." He was quiet. "I've been thinking about that too," he said. "Different version, same thought." "What's your version?" "The day I walked into Briggs's store looking for a worker," he said. "I was going to lose everything. I knew it. I just hadn't admitted it yet. And Briggs pointed to you and I said—" He stopped. "You said her," she said. "Yes." He held her gaze. "And you said judge my hands, not my size. And I didn't understand yet what I was looking at." He paused. "But I think some part of me did. Because I gave you the job, and I gave you the 15 cents, and I think I knew before I could have told you why that something was changing." She looked at him. "Nathan Carter," she said. "That is the most words I have ever heard you say at one time." He looked slightly embarrassed. "Don't get used to it," he said. "I won't," she said, and smiled, and the smile was the real one, the one she didn't have to make happen. "But I'm glad you said them." He reached across the table and closed the ledger. "Come on," he said. "It's late. The numbers will keep." She put her hand flat on his for a moment, the silver ring catching the low firelight. "They will," she said. "They're in good shape." He stood, and she put out the lamp, and they walked through the quiet house together past Eli's door, where the small sounds of a sleeping child came through the wood, and the ranch breathed around them in the dark solid and alive and theirs. By the following spring, Carter Ranch had 30 more head of cattle than it had seen in 4 years. Pete had taken on a younger hand named Thomas, 17 and serious, who had arrived at the gate one March morning asking for work and had not left. The kitchen garden had been doubled in size, and what it produced had begun to supply not just the household, but a small arrangement with the Millhaven General Store that Briggs had proposed himself with a quality of sheepishness that Clara had found endearing. Eli had started a correspondence with the Agricultural Extension in Austin, asking questions about soil composition that made the extension agent write back with genuine interest and eventually with a personal note saying he'd never had a correspondent who asked quite such precise questions. And what was the boy's age? 7. Clara wrote back. He takes after his father. Both of his fathers, she thought, and didn't write. The people of Mill Haven, who had watched Clara Whitfield walk through their streets and made their calculations about her size, her status, her prospects, her worth, had largely recalibrated. Not all of them. Some people's calculations were load-bearing walls, and you couldn't remove them without the whole structure falling. But enough of them. Enough that the whispers were quieter, and the nods were more common, and Vera Hadley had become something she wouldn't have called a friend exactly, but something in that direction. Connors was still Connors. The bank review had not destroyed him. A man like that was too well built to destroy easily, but it had cost him, and the costing had made him quieter, and his quietness made the county function better, which was its own kind of progress. Clara had changed the ranch house the way she'd always changed things, practically first, aesthetically second. Curtains on the windows because they kept the heat out in summer and the cold out in winter. Not because they were pretty though they were. A proper table in the kitchen bigger than the old one because there were more people at it now, and she believed in a table that could hold everyone. A shelf of books that had started with the 3 she'd brought in her bag and expanded as Nathan proved to be improbably and wonderfully a reader. She found this out in February, when she'd been looking for the stock ledger, and had found instead a copy of Great Expectations tucked under Nathan's side of the bed with a strip of leather marking his place 3/4 through. She'd stood there with it in her hand for a long moment. At supper she set it on the table in front of him. He looked at it, looked at her. "Pete's," he said without conviction. "Pete can't read," she said. A pause. "I started it in the fall," he said with the defensiveness of a man whose privacy has been gently violated. "When things were I couldn't sleep, and there was a copy at Briggs's." She sat down. "What do you think of it?" she said. He looked at her sideways, testing whether she was going to make something of it. She looked back evenly. "Pip is an idiot," he said. "He grows out of it," she said. "Does he grow out of it enough? Read to the end and tell me what you think." He picked up the book, put it down. "You've read it 3 times." He looked at her. "Of course you have," he said. But the way he said it was the way she'd learned to hear everything he said, with the thing underneath the words, the thing that said, "I am continuously surprised by you, and I find that I like it." She reached across and picked up the book and handed it back to him. "After supper," she said. "Eli would like it too." And so that became the thing. After supper in the firelight. Nathan reading aloud. Eli curled at the other end of the settle with his feet tucked under him. Clara doing the mending, or the week's accounts, and the ranch quiet around them, and the world outside, doing whatever it did. While inside this house, there was warmth and words, and the specific sound of a family that had come together sideways and landed improbably exactly right. On an evening in April. Clara stood at the fence of the east pasture, the old fence rebuilt twice now solid, and looked out at the land. She had Daniel's watch in her hand. She wound it the way she did every evening, the habit so old it lived in her hands without thinking. The small click of the mechanism catching, the quiet tick of it resuming. She heard Nathan come up behind her and stop. She didn't turn. "Thinking again," he said. "Always," she said. He came to stand beside her at the fence. Not behind her, beside her. That had always been his way, beside, not in front of, not behind. The particular equality of it was something she had come to understand was not accidental. She held the watch up. "He would have liked you," she said. "Daniel. He liked competent people. People who worked hard and didn't make excuses." She paused. "He would have made you crazy because he talked more than you do, and he found silence uncomfortable. But he would have liked you." Nathan was quiet. "I think I would have liked him," he said. She looked at the watch. "He would have been glad," she said. "That Eli has—" She stopped. "That Eli has a man who listens to him." She felt Nathan's hand come to her shoulder, gentle and steady. She closed the watch case. She put it in her pocket beside the gold ring that still lived there. She'd kept it there. Had decided sometime in February to keep it there, rather than put it away in a drawer somewhere, because Eli had been right. You carried the person, not the thing, but the thing helped. She put her hand over Nathan's where it rested on her shoulder. The east pasture stretched out before them in the April evening green from the spring rains, the cattle moving through it with the easy confidence of animals who had enough grass, enough water, enough care. "We should put in that second water line this summer," she said, "before the heat." "I know," he said, "and the bunkhouse needs a new roof before Thomas has to move out of it." "I know that too." "And I think we should consider—" "Clara," he said. Stop running the ranch for 5 minutes." She looked at the pasture. "I don't know how," she said. "I know," he said. "Stand here anyway." She stood there. The evening settled around them soft and unhurried, the kind of April evening that existed as its own argument for why it was worth getting through the hard parts to reach the good ones. She thought about this morning in Finch's shop, the coins in her fist, the decision she'd made without knowing it was the decision that would lead her here. She thought about a 6-year-old boy who built ranches out of sticks and had turned out to be exactly right about the people around him. She thought about a man who'd said her with the wrong tone and had spent 4 months becoming someone who would never say it that way again. She thought about what it meant to be chosen. Not despite what you were. Not in spite of the things people had decided about you before they knew you. But because of all of it, the hands and the mind and the stubbornness and the way you showed up at 5:45 when someone said to be there at 6. She thought about worth. About how long she'd spent trying to prove it to people who had already decided, and how much energy that had taken, and how different it felt to stand in a place where the proving was over. Not because she'd finally done enough, but because she'd found the right place and the right people, and worth wasn't something you proved. It was something you built. And this ranch, this man, this boy, asleep in the house behind them, this fence she'd helped repair, and these cattle she'd helped save, and this life that had come together from the pieces of a desperate morning and a wrong look and a 15-cent coin. This was built, solid and real and hers. "Nathan," she said. "Still here," he said. "Good," she said. She leaned into his side, and he put his arm around her, and the watch ticked steadily in her pocket, and the ranch breathed around them, and the woman who had walked into Millhaven with nothing but her